the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, divinely prepared by the noble prophet Drew Ali, by the guiding of his Father God Allah, the great God of the universe, the creation and fall of man. Time never was when man was not. If life of man at any time began, a time would come when it would end. The thoughts of Allah cannot be circumscribed. No finite mind can comprehend things infinite. All finite things are subject unto change. All finite things will cease to be, because there was a time when they were not. The bodies and the souls of men are finite things, and they will change. Yea, from the finite point of view, the time will come when they will be no more. But man himself is not the body, nor the soul. He is a spirit, and a part of Allah. Creative fate gave to man, to spirit man, a soul that he might function on the plane of soul, gave him a body of the flesh, that he might function on the plane of things made manifest. Why did creative fate give to spirit man a soul that he might function on the plane of soul? Why did creative fate give to soul a body of the flesh, that he might function on the plane of things that are made manifest? Hear now, ye cherubim, ye seraphim, ye angels, and ye men. Hear now, O protoplast, and earth, and plant and beast. Hear now, ye creeping things of earth, ye fish that swim, ye birds that fly. Hear now, ye winds that blow, ye thunders and ye lightnings of the sky. Hear now, ye spirits of the fire, of water, earth, and air. Hear now, O everything that is, or was, or evermore will be, for wisdom speaks from out of the highest plane of spirit life. Man is a thought of Allah. All thoughts of Allah are infinite. They are not measured up by time, for things that are concerned with time begin and end. The thoughts of Allah are the everlasting of the past, unto the never-ending days to come, and so is man, the spirit man. But man, like every other thought of Allah, was but a seed that held within itself the potencies of Allah, just as the seed of any plant of earth holds deep within itself the attributes of every part of that especial plant. So spirit man, as seed of Allah, held deep within himself the attributes of every part of God. Now, seed are perfect, yea, as perfect as the source from which they come, but they are not unfolded into life made manifest. The child is as perfect as the mother is. So man, the seed, must be deep planted in a soil that he might grow, unfold, as does the bud unfold to show the flower. The human seed that came forth from the heart of Allah was full ordained to be the Lord of plane of soul, and of the plane of things made manifest. So Allah, the husbandman of everything that is, threw forth this human seed into the soil of soul. It grew apace, and man became a living soul, and he became the Lord of all the kingdom of the soul. Hark now, let every creature hear. The plane of soul is but the ether of the spirit plane, vibrating not so fast, and in the slower rhythm of this plane, the essences of life are manifest, the perfumes and the odors, the true sensations, and the all of love are manifest. And these soul attributes become a body beautiful. A multitude of lessons man must learn upon the plane of soul, and here he tarries many ages, until his lessons are all learned. Upon the boundary of the plane of soul, the ether began to vibrate slower still, and then the essences took on a final garb. The perfumes and the odors and the true sensations, and the all of love were clothed in flesh, and man was clothed in flesh. Perfected man must pass through all the ways of life, and so a carnal nature was full manifest, a nature that sprang forth from fleshly things. Without a foe, a soldier never knows his strength, and thought must be developed by the exercise of strength. And so this carnal nature soon became a foe that man must fight, that he might be the strength of Allah made manifest. Let every living thing stand still and hear. Man is the Lord of all the plane of manifest, of protoplast, of mineral, of plant, of beast. But he give up his birthrights just to gratify his lower self. But man will regain his lost estate, his heritage, but he must do it in a conflict that cannot be told in words. Yea, he must suffer trials and temptations manifold. But let him know that cherubim and seraphim that rule the stations of the sun and spirit of the mighty Allah, who rule the solar stars, are his protectors and his guide, and they will lead to victory. Man will be fully saved, redeemed, perfected by the things he suffers on the plane of flesh and on the plane of soul. When man has conquered carnal things, his garb of flesh will then have served its purpose well, and it will fall, will be no more. Then he will stand untrammeled on the plane of soul, where he must full complete his victories. Unnumbered foes will stand before man upon the plane of soul. These he must overcome, yea, overcome them every one. Thus hope will ever be his beacon light. There is no failure for the human soul, for Allah is leading on, and victory is sure. Man cannot die. The spirit man is one with Allah, and while Allah lives, man cannot die. When man has conquered every foe upon the plane of soul, the seed will have full opened out, will have unfolded in the holy breath. The garb of soul will then have served its purpose well, and man will need it nevermore, and it will pass and be no more, and man will then attain unto the blessedness of perfectness, and be at one with Allah.
Edgar Cayce on human origins. The ascent of man according to Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was a near-death experiencer who had more recorded out-of-body journeys than anyone ever recorded and revealed volumes of psychic material, much of which was verified to be true to the amazement of doctors and scientists. Cayce discovered at a young age he could go into a self-induced trance and travel while out of body to afterlife realms to obtain information on virtually any subject. Cayce claimed anyone could do what he did with the proper training and attunement. During his out-of-body journeys, Cayce was able to tap into a virtually unlimited amount of information, which he referred to as the universal mind. He was able to reveal previously unknown information on a wide range of subjects such as astrology, the afterlife, religion, the future, consciousness, and human origins, just to name a few. The following information on human origins was revealed to Cayce during his excursions while out of the body. In the beginning, God. People usually demand a beginning, so in the beginning there was a sea of spirit and it filled all of space. The spirit was static, content, and aware of itself. It was a giant resting on the bosom of its thought and contemplating what it is. Then the spirit moved into action. It withdrew into itself until all of space was empty. In the center, the sparkling mind of the spirit shone. This was the beginning of the individuality of the spirit. This was what the spirit discovered itself to be when it awakened. This spirit was God. God desired self-expression and desired companionship, therefore, God projected the cosmos and souls. The cosmos was built with music, arithmetic, geometry, harmony, system, and balance. The building blocks were all of the same material, the life essence. God simply changed the wavelength and rate of vibration of these building blocks, thereby creating the patterns for multitudes of life forms. This action resulted in the law of diversity, which supplied endless patterns. God played on this law of diversity as a pianist plays on a piano, producing melodies and arranging them in a symphony. Each design carried within it the plan for its evolution, both physical and spiritual. This plan corresponds to the sound of a note struck on a piano. The sounds of several notes unite to make a chord, chords in turn become phrases, phrases become melodies, melodies intermingle and move back and forth, across and between and around each other, to make a symphony. Then in the end, the music will stop and the physical universe will be no more, but between the beginning and the finish of the music, there was glorious beauty and a glorious experience. The spiritual universe will continue on. Everything assumed its design in various forms, and their activity resulted in the laws of attraction and repulsion. All forms would attract and repel each other in their evolutionary dance. All things are a part of God and an expression of God's thought. The mind of God was the force which propelled and perpetuated these thoughts. All minds, as thoughts of God, do everything God imagined. Everything which came into being is an aspect of this one mind. All things, including the souls of individuals, were created as fractals of God for companionship with God, the whole. This revelation from Casey revealed the astonishing fact of how self-similar the universe is on every scale, from the atom to biological organisms, from human beings to the planet Earth, from solar systems to galaxies, from the universes to God. The pattern God used to create souls was the pattern of God's own spirit. The spirit is life. From the spirit, the mind builds patterns. From the mind, the physical creation is the result. This is how the spirit, the mind, and individuality became the pattern for souls. This is how cause, action, and effect became the pattern for everything. First there was the spirit, the first cause, then there was the action which withdrew spirit into itself, then there was the resulting individuality of God. The spirit of the individual existed before the soul of the individual was created. The spirit keeps the knowledge of its identity with God. The soul has the ability to experience the activities of the mind in a manner separate from God. Thus, new individuals issued from God and remained dependent upon God, but individuals were also aware of an existence apart from God. Individuals were given the power to choose, free will, and direct their own activity. Without free will, it would only remain a part of the individuality of God. The mind, issuing as a force from God, would naturally fulfill God's thoughts unless directed otherwise. The power to do this, to direct the force of mind individually from God, is free will. And the record or memory of this freedom is the soul. The soul began with its first expression of free will through the force of mind. The first thought the spirit generated from free will, the first diversion of the force of mind from its normal path of unity with God, was the beginning of the soul. The nucleus of the soul was the balance of positive and negative forces equal in power. These forces produce harmonious activities. The positive force initiates, impregnates, and thrusts forward, while its polar negative force receives, nourishes, and ejects. The steps of this evolutionary process are also the stages of the thought process: perception, reflection, and opinion. Thus, the soul consists of two states of consciousness: 1, the spirit which bears a knowledge of its identity with God, and 2, the soul which bears a knowledge of everything it experienced. The plan for the soul is a cycle of experience unlimited in scope and duration. Through this evolutionary cycle, the soul will come to know the creation in all its aspects at the discretion of the will. The cycle would be completed when the desire of the will was no longer different from the thought of God. The consciousness of the soul would then merge with its spiritual consciousness of its identity with God. Then the soul will return to its source as the companion it was intended to be. As a companion, the soul would remain conscious of its separate individuality and would be aware of its own free will as it now acted as a part of God, but not diverting its mind because it was in agreement with God's influence on the mind of the soul. Until this state of at-one-ment was reached, the soul would not be a companion in the true sense of the word. The idea of returning to God means a loss of individuality is paradoxical, since God is aware of everything happening and must therefore be aware of the consciousness of each individual. The return of the soul is the return of the image to whom imagined it. The consciousness of the individual, its soul record, could not be destroyed without destroying a part of God. When a soul returns to God, it becomes aware of itself not only as a part of God, but as a part of every other soul, and everything. What is lost is the ego, the desire to do other than the desire of God. When the soul returns to God, the ego is voluntarily relinquished. This is the symbology behind the crucifixion of Christ. The plan for the soul included experiencing of all creation, but it did not necessarily mean participating in all forms and substance. Nor did it mean souls can interfere with the creation. Nor did it mean souls are to spin their own little worlds, twisting and bending laws to make images of their dreams. But these things could happen. the soul was the greatest thing God made because it has free will. Once free will was given, God did nothing to curb it. However it acted, it had to act within God's reality. By whatever route, the soul will return to God. The apparent fact of the human body being a speck of dust on a small planet in a regular galaxy in a universe of galaxies can lead to the illusion of humans being a small creation. But the soul is the unlimited activity of the mind and the grandeur of imagination. At first, there was little difference between the consciousness of the new individual, i.e., soul, and its consciousness of identity with God, i.e., spirit. Souls merely watched the flow of the mind, somewhat as people daydreaming, marveling at its power and versatility. Then souls began to act itself, imitating and paralleling what mind was doing. Gradually souls acquired experience, becoming a complementary rather than an imitative force. It helped to extend, modify, and regulate creation. Certain souls became aggressive with their own power and began to experiment with it. They mingled with the dust of the stars and the winds of the spheres, feeling them, and becoming part of them. One result of this was an unbalance between the positive and negative forces. To feel things demanded the negative force. To express through things, and directing and managing them, required the positive force. Another result of souls becoming aggressive with their own power was the gradual weakening of the link between the two states of consciousness, i.e., spirit and the soul. Some souls became more concerned with and aware of their own creations rather than God's. This resulted in the fall of certain souls to an even lower consciousness. The Bible allegorically refers to this event as the fall in the Garden of Eden and the revolt of the angels in the book of Revelation. This event is also the basis for the cosmology of Christian Gnosticism and Jewish mysticism. To enter into another level of creation and become part of it, the soul had to assume a new, or third consciousness, a physical form. Assuming a physical form is a way of experiencing that particular level of creation by means of a conscious mind, i.e., the third consciousness. Through the conscious mind, an individual can experience physical consciousness, the physical body, the five senses, the glandular and nervous systems. This transformation of consciousness does not apply everywhere at this level of creation. In other worlds and solar systems, the transformation may differ. One can only imagine the number of these other worlds and the aspects of divine mind which they represent. When a soul enters into another level of creation and its consciousness, it separated itself temporarily from the consciousness of its own soul, and became even further removed from the consciousness of its spirit. Thus, instead of helping to direct the flow of creation and contributing to it, the soul found itself in the stream and drifting along with it. The farther the soul traveled from the shore, the more it succumbed to the pull of the current and the more difficult was the task of getting back to land. Planets and solar systems became a temptation to souls. Each solar system had its own course and its own plan. Souls moved toward them through the activity of a constant stream of mind. When a soul leaped into the stream, by immersing itself in the system through which the stream was flowing, it had the force of the current to contend with, and its free will was hampered. It was very easy, under these circumstances, to drift with the current. Each solar system also represents an opportunity for development, advancement, and growth toward the ideal of complete companionship with God, the position of co-creator in the vast system of universal mind. Our solar system also attracted souls. Since each solar system is a single expression of the divine, with its planets as integral parts, the Earth came into the path of souls. Each solar system in the universe is like an atom in a universe of worlds. Atoms have quantum levels for electrons to travel around. The Sun has quantum levels for planets to travel around. The planets of our solar system are physical representations of heavenly dimensions. These levels as a whole are the consciousness of our solar system. There are 9 planetary afterlife dimensions to the consciousness of our solar system. The planet Earth represents the third dimension where three-dimensional life is experienced in our solar system. The Earth is an expression of divine mind with its own laws, its own plan, and its own evolution. Souls, longing to feel the beauty of the seas, the winds, the forest, and the flowers, mixed with them and expressed themselves through them. They also mingled with the animals, and made thought forms in imitation of them. Souls played at creating and imitated God. But this interfered with the evolutionary plan of the Earth. Thus, the stream of mind carrying out this plan for the earth gradually drew souls into its current. Souls had to evolve into the bodies they had themselves created. This entanglement of souls into physical form was a probability from the beginning. But God did not know when it would happen until the souls, of their own free will, had caused it to happen. All souls were created by God in the very beginning, before the universe was created. No other souls have been created since then. This means all souls on this planet pre-existed before birth. Of the souls which God created, only a comparative few have entered into the experience of our solar system. Many other souls have gone through or are going through a similar entanglement in other solar systems in the universe. The sons of God unite with the daughters of men. A way to liberate the souls entangled in matter was created. A physical form became available as a vehicle for the soul on Earth. A way became available for souls to enter the Earth and experience it as part of their evolutionary reincarnation cycle. Of the physical forms already existing on Earth, a species of anthropoid ape-man most nearly approached the necessary pattern. Souls descended on these apes, hovering above and about them rather than inhabiting them, and influenced them to move toward a different goal from the simple one they had been pursuing. They came down out of the trees, built fires, made tools, lived in communities, and began to communicate with each other. Eventually they lost their animal look, shed bodily hair, and took on refinements of manner and habit. The evolution of the human body occurred partly through the soul's influence on the endocrine glands until the ape-man was a three-dimensional objectification of the soul hovering above it. Then the soul fully descended into the body and Earth had a new inhabitant, the Homo sapien. Homo sapiens appeared in 5 different places on Earth at the same time, as the 5 races. This evolved human is what the Bible refers to as Adam. When souls incarnated into physical form, it would bring the divine consciousness, i.e., the spirit, in with it. Casey referred to this divine consciousness as the Christ consciousness or Buddhahood, or the superconsciousness. Christ consciousness has little to do with the personality known as Jesus. It means a person has attained a complete human-divine unity. This human-divine unity has been attained by many people thus far. One such person was Jesus. The problem for the soul entangled in flesh was to overcome the attractions of the earth to the extent the soul would be as free in the body as out of it. Only when the body was no longer a hindrance to the free express of the soul would the cycle of earth be finished. This is the condition of having a perfect unity of the human with the divine. In a smaller field, this was the evolutionary drama of free will and creation. In a still smaller field, each atom of the physical body is a world in itself where a drama of free will and creation is occurring. The soul brings life into each atom, and each atom is a physical reflection of the soul's pattern. With the advent of consciousness, humans became aware of sex meaning something more to them than to the animals. Sex is the door which new souls enter the earth, a door unnecessary in other heavenly planetary realms. Sex is the only means which trapped souls have of being liberated from their predicament, through the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The plan for the earth cycle of souls was a limited series of incarnations with periods in between of dwelling in other heavenly dimensions of consciousness. Reincarnation would continue until a soul's every thought and action of the physical body was in accord with the plan originally laid out for the soul, i.e., a human divine unity, Christ consciousness. When the body was no longer a hindrance to the free expression of the soul, when the conscious mind had merged with the subconscious, the earth cycle was finished and the soul liberated to move on to new adventures. This conquest of the physical body could not be attained until there was perfection in the other dimensions of consciousness, which are physically represented by our solar system. Astrologically, the goal for the soul is to attain a level of consciousness representing the total divine expression of the sun and its planets. Whichever level of consciousness the soul assumes, it becomes the focal point of activity. The other states of consciousness receded to the position of urges and influences. The evolution of the Christ soul from Adam to Jesus to Christhood. The human race was fostered by a soul who had completed his experience of creation, attained Christhood, returned to God, and became a companion to God and a co-creator. This is the soul known as Jesus. The first evolutionary transformation of ape-men to Homo sapiens is who the Bible refers to as Adam. This was the beginning of the divine consciousness into flesh on the earth. the soul known as Jesus, was one of the first souls to enter into one of the Adamic races. The soul of Jesus was interested in the plight of its fellow souls trapped in earth. After supervising the influx of souls into flesh, the Christ soul took form itself, from time to time, to act as a leader for the people. At first, these souls just slightly inhabited the bodies of ape men while remembering their true identities as spirit beings. But gradually, after many incarnations, these souls descended even further into physical consciousness, and the result was a decrease in their spiritual mentality. They remembered their true selves only in dreams and in fables which were handed down from one generation to another. Religion came into being as a ritual of longing for lost spirit memories. The arts were born, which included music and geometry. This knowledge was brought into the world from incoming souls who gradually forgot their heavenly source. This knowledge had to be written down, learned, and taught to each new generation. Finally, humans were left with a conscious mind separated from their own individuality as souls. This individual identity as a soul became the subconscious mind. The individual identity or awareness of the physical world became the conscious mind. The subconscious mind, i.e., the soul, influenced the conscious mind and gave it its stature and quality. The subconscious mind dwelt in the suit of clothes, which is the physical body, and only in sleep is it disrobed. Conscious minds, left to its own influence, will work out the plans and desires of God. Humans eventually developed theories for what they felt was true, but no longer knew to be true. The result was the creation of philosophy and theology. Humans searched and discovered higher knowledge, which they carried within themselves but could no longer reach with the conscious mind. This resulted in the creation of science. Humans evolved from having an awareness of higher spirit knowledge to having only mystical dreams, revealed religions, philosophy, and theology. This evolution of consciousness ultimately reached a plateau, and humans generally only believed what they could see and feel and prove in terms of their conscious minds. Then humanity began the struggle of regaining this higher knowledge. Meanwhile, the Christ soul continued to teach and lead humanity by incarnating as the biblical characters named Adam, Enoch, and Melchizedek. Enoch and Melchizedek experienced neither birth nor death. Then Christ's soul realized after these incarnations it was necessary to give humanity a pattern by which they could follow in order to return to God. The Christ soul achieved this goal by incarnating as the personality known as Jesus, who became victorious over the death of the physical body by laying aside the ego, accepting the crucifixion of the body in order to return to God. Jesus created a pattern for humans to follow. Through the acts of leading a perfect life and becoming unjustly killed, this reversed the negative karma, i.e., the law of God, an eye for an eye, which came from Jesus' first incarnation as Adam. The law of karma as a lesson for soul evolution. At present, humanity is in a state of great spiritual darkness, the darkness which precedes dawn. Humanity developed a level of skepticism which reached a point where it forced humans to make conclusions they knew was intuitively wrong. At the same time, humanity continued their investigation of natural phenomena to the point where conscious awareness disproved all the higher knowledge souls had acquired in the beginning. The free will of humanity is discovering how all roads to higher knowledge leads toward the same destination and conclusions. Scientific, theological, and philosophical knowledge, which has no desire to join forces, are approaching a point of merger. Skepticism faces destruction by its own hand. Humanity is at all times the total of what they have been and done, what they have fought and defended, and what they have hated and loved. In the three-dimensional consciousness of every human, in every atom of the human body, is a reflection of the soul and a crystallization of their individuality. Their emotional and nervous structures, their mental abilities, aptitudes, aversions, preferences, fears, follies, ambitions, and character are the sum of what humans have done with their free will. This makes every personality, as the earthly cloak of an individuality, is different from every other personality. The law of karma, which is Earth's law of cause and effect of reaping what one sows, also makes humans different from one another in their joys and sorrows, in their handicaps, their strengths, their weaknesses, their virtues and vices, their appreciation of beauty, and their comprehension of truth. Transgressions humans make in life must be corrected in life, if not in the same life, then in a future incarnation. The Earth's natural law, not the law of humanity or God, demands an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This same law applies to groups of people, as they act together. There is karma for families, for tribes, for races, and for nations. For example, when a nation of individuals started a war in a previous lifetime and are reincarnated, a war will be committed against that nation. Only when such a nation is defeated in humility by a nation with justice and mercy, will the karma of war be lifted from the defeated nation. Every person's life is shaped to some extent by karma, their own, their associates, their loved ones, their nation, their race, and the entire world itself. But karma is not greater than free will. It is what a person does with these influences and urges, how they react to them, which makes the difference in their soul development. Because of karma, some things are more probable than others, but as long as there exists free will, anything is possible. Thus free will and predestination coexist within human beings. Their past experiences limit them in probability and incline them in certain directions, but free will can always draw the sword from the stone. The combination of free will and predestination means humans freely choose their own predetermined destiny to return to God. No soul incarnates without having a general plan for the life to be experienced. The personality. A person expresses in life is only one of the many personalities, i.e., facets of the soul, a person can express. The mission of every soul is to work on one or several facets of the soul's karma, which can be thought of as the soul's memory of its prior actions. A soul does not choose a mission which is more than the soul can handle or which is too much for the personality assigned to or chosen by the soul. Some souls can freely choose their own conditions in which to be born and complete their missions. Other souls who have made too many mistakes in past lives and who have become dangerously influenced by worldly desires, are incarnated into conditions chosen by law of karma at a time and under circumstances best suited to help them with their karmic debt. Their mission is seldom perfectly fulfilled because of such a soul's large amount of negative karma. Their mission is sometimes badly neglected. The circumstances and conditions a soul chooses to incarnate into is usually made at conception, when a channel for a soul's expression is opened by the parents. When this occurs, a pattern is made by the mingling of the soul patterns of the parents. This sets up certain karmic conditions. A soul whose own karma approximates these karmic conditions will be attracted to the opportunity presented. Since the karmic pattern created by the parents will not be exactly the same the incarnating soul's own karma, the soul must take on some of the karma of the parents. Conditions other than the created pattern are conditions the soul must consider when choosing a body to be born with. Such conditions include the future of the incarnated person's life, former associations with the parents, the incarnation of souls it wishes to incarnate with, live with, and with whom the soul will have problems to work out with. In some cases the parents are the only reason for some souls to incarnate. Such a child will be devoted to them and remain close to them. The child then completes its mission by dying, so the child's death can teach the parents very valuable lessons in life and of spirit. In other cases, the parents are only used as a means for which the child can leave home and go about its business in completing its mission. The soul may actually occupy a fetus as early as 3 months after conception or even as late as a month after birth. In the latter case, the soul hovers over the infant's body since birth to decide whether or not to occupy it. Once the decision is made and the occupation completed, the separation between the conscious mind, personality, and subconscious mind, the soul, takes place and the soul record, memory, of the child begins. The fact that some babies are miscarried does not mean it was refused as a vehicle for a soul. Just the opposite is true. The opportunity to incarnate was taken away from the soul due to natural forces, and this made the occupation of that particular body impossible. The personality is a facet of the soul's individuality experienced in three-dimensional consciousness, body, soul, spirit. The other facets of the soul remains in shadow, in the background. It gives tone to the personality through its urges, appreciations, tastes, avocations, and intuition. A particular personality of an individual is shaped by 3 or 4 incarnations. The emotions and talents of a person reflect these past incarnations. A person's dreams, visions, and meditations are reflections of the soul's experience in other dimensions, heavenly realms, of consciousness associated physically by our solar system. The human intellect was created from the stars and planets. The intellect is the mind force of the soul, which is conditioned by its previous incarnations on Earth and its experiences in other dimensions and even in other solar systems. The intellect becomes dimmed or brightened by its recent experiences within the three-dimensional consciousness of the solar system and the experiences within other dimensional realms of consciousness. Thus, a personality is only one facet of the soul. The soul may incarnate as any facet to express that particular portion of itself. As a soul approaches its completion of the solar cycle of consciousness, the personality becomes more multisided and expresses greater facets of the soul. This is because each incarnation burns off negative karma, which requires less and less attention. Finally, the personality will become a complete expression of the soul, and the cycle of reincarnation is finished for the soul. As the soul succumbs to worldly desires, by abandoning its intellect for sensuality, it becomes more and more one-sided. When the individual has attained complete human-divine unity, its cycle of reincarnations is finished, the soul is liberated, and the soul then merges with its spirit and, therefore, with God. The soul record, memory, is forever retained. This record is, at all times, is the sum total of what the soul personality has been, all it has thought, all it has experienced, all it has eaten, drunk, and felt through the ages. Thus, as the soul is subjected to reincarnation, both the atheist and the religionist are correct. The atheist believes the personality does not survive after death. The religionist believes the soul is judged after death by its creator. Substituting personality for soul, both are expressing the truth. The personality is evaluated after death and then returns to the soul which created it, thereby giving up its own independent existence and becoming once again a facet of the soul. This process is different from the process where the soul merges with the spirit after it completes its cycles of reincarnation. With each incarnation into the physical realm, the solar system, and the other realms of consciousness, the general plan for perfecting the soul proceeds. Another facet of the soul is assumed and incarnated to experience tribulation in order to reinforce the character of the soul's entire personality. The trials and tribulations of individuals, groups, nations, and races are dealt with time and time again through free will until they are solved. Then souls are free to journey to other worlds, or other solar systems, or other universes, or other dimensions of the hierarchy of consciousness. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How? The mind of God moved, and matter, form, came into being. Spirit is life. Mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. In each atom, in each corpuscle, is life. Life is what you worship as God, and Earth is only an atom in the universe of worlds. All souls in the beginning were one with the Father. The separation or turning away brought evil. For man may separate himself from God, the Spirit, but the Spirit does not separate from man. All souls were created in the beginning and are finding their way back to whence they came. Each soul is destined to become a portion again of the first cause, or back to its maker. The Father has not willed that any soul should perish, and is thus mindful that each soul has again, and yet again, the opportunity for making its path straight. Life is, in all its manifestations in every animate force, creative force in action, and is the love of expression, or expressing that life, truth becoming a result of life's love expressed. 4. These are but names, unless experienced in the consciousness of each soul. All power, all force, is a manifestation of what is termed the God consciousness. The coming into the earth has been and is, for the evolution or evolving of the soul unto its awareness. Birth in the physical is death in the spiritual. Death in the physical is the birth in the spiritual. Each soul enters with a mission. We all have a mission to perform. The conquering of self is truly greater than were one to conquer many worlds. He who understands nature walks close with God. What is truth? Law. What is law? Love. What is love? God. What is God? Law and love. These are as the cycle of truth itself. You grow to heaven. You don't go to heaven. The system of metaphysical thought, which emerges from the Casey material, can be described as a Christianized version of the mystery religions of ancient Egypt, Chaldea, Persia, India, and Greece. It fits Christ into the mystical tradition of one God for all people, and places Christ in his proper place, at the apex of the philosophical structure, the capstone of the pyramid. Tradition. When he discovered that his subconscious information declared the ancient mystic religions to be true, and acclaimed Jesus as their crowning glory. Glory, he suffered the greatest mental and emotional shock of his life. Casey had only a 7th grade education and consciously knew nothing of what he said while in a deep trance-like state. He was only versed in the Bible and had no high school or college background of any kind. Up until his revelations, Casey had never heard of the mystery religions. Yet the Casey material agrees with everything about them that is known to be authentic. He spoke at length on Christian Gnosticism well before the Gnostic writings were discovered in Egypt after his death. Casey affirmed that Christian Gnosticism is the type of Christianity that was taught by Jesus. Much of the information from Casey has solved some of the greatest mysteries of humanity, some of which were later validated after the discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the early Christian writings discovered in Egypt. Casey's descriptions of the Essenes of Mount Carmel reveal the religious sect to be an ideal for others who would prepare the way for the second coming of Christ. Casey's revelations of Jesus' so-called lost years as a youth studying in Egypt, Persia, and India suggest an important compatibility between the Eastern and Western religions. Casey's Christology also makes the Christ soul not only an ideal and pattern toward which everyone should aspire, but a living presence to guide people toward at-one-ment with God, the perfect divine human unity which Jesus attained. According to the Casey material, Jesus and Adam were different incarnations of the same Christ soul. Eve and the Virgin Mary, Jesus' twin soul, were also different incarnations of the same soul. This karmic connection between Adam and Jesus explains why Jesus was able to pay the karmic debt by atoning for the sin of Adam. This Adam-Jesus connection can be seen in the following excerpt from the Casey readings. Question: when did the knowledge come to Jesus that he was to be the savior of the world? Casey: when he fell in Eden. Casey reading 2067-7. According to Casey, many other personalities from the Old Testament and history were also incarnations of Jesus. The Casey material describes the entire Christian Bible as part of the story of Jesus' long struggle to attain Christhood and provide humanity a pattern to do the same. 2. The incarnations of Jesus according to Casey. The following is a list of the incarnations of Jesus according to Casey. Note that all these incarnations of Jesus, as Casey describes them, have in common their role as psychic revelators. 1. Amilius. Amilius was the first expression of divine mind, the Logos, the Christ soul before his incarnation into a physical body, corresponding to Genesis 1, and incarnation into a physical body, corresponding to Genesis 2. He was the entity Casey identified as Amilius living in the lost civilization of Atlantis, who redirected the process of human evolution by creating a more appropriate physical form for the influx of souls to incarnate into rather than incarnating into the ape-like human form, which souls had entangled themselves in. The first wave of souls, known as the sons of men, became entrapped in the physical plane accidentally through their misuse of free will. These events gave rise to the legend of the fall of the angels. The second wave, the sons of God, consisted of those souls led by Amilius, the Christ soul, who voluntarily became entrapped in flesh as Adam in order to assist the first wave. 2. Adam. Adam was the first son of man and son of God, the Christ soul after his incarnation into a physical body, corresponding to Genesis 2. Casey sometimes used the word Adam to refer to the entire group of souls which had accompanied the Christ soul's incarnation into the earth realm. These Adams are incarnated as the 5 races on 5 separate continents. Eventually, the Christ soul, as Adam, joined his twin soul, the Eve Virgin Mary soul, by allowing himself to be seduced by materiality as symbolized by his acceptance of the forbidden fruit. The other sons of God followed suit and, as a result, interbred with the daughters of men, Genesis 6 verse 2. In this light, humanity's banishment from the Garden of Eden was actually a great blessing, because death, reincarnation, and karma are all designed to teach us to move away from materiality and toward our true spiritual nature. 3. Enoch. Enoch is mentioned in several pseudepigraphal works, the Book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, 2 Enoch, and 3 Enoch, as well as some Kabbalistic writings, in addition to his brief mention in Genesis 5 verses 18 to 24, which concludes, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." The Book of Enoch describes the fall of the Watchers into materiality and Enoch's heavenly sojourns, as well as his transfiguration into the angel Metatron. It is revealed to him the future up to the time of the Messiah as well. Enoch also learns about the hierarchy of the angelic realm and the divine throne chariot of Ezekiel. The Book of Enoch introduces a messianic figure referred to as the Son of Man. In the canonical New Testament, Enoch is mentioned in Hebrews 11 verse 5 and Jude 14 to 15. The passage in Jude quotes directly from the pseudepigraphal Book of Enoch, which shows the author of the Epistle of Jude, the brother of Jesus, considered the Book of Enoch to be sacred scripture. Falk Hermes. Hermes of the Casey readings is the one who designed and built the Great Pyramid under the direction of Ra-Tah. There is another historical connection between a Hermes and Egypt, which is found in the Hellenistic writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the sage who began the Hermetic tradition. Hermes is also referred to in the Poimandres as the shepherd of men, who teaches that the word which came forth from the light is the Son of God. Accordingly, Hermes also taught that human nature consists of such divine elements as nature, light, mind, and life, and that by recognizing them we may return to the invisible, immaterial world of truth. 5. Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God, who shares bread and wine with Abraham in Genesis 14 verses 18 to 20. He is also mentioned both in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 11q Melch, and the Melchizedek in the Nag Hammadi Codex, where he appears as a cosmic angelic figure, the risen Christ. Hebrews 5 verses 8 to 10 calls Jesus a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, which explains how Jesus was a priestly Messiah without being a Levite. According to Casey, Melchizedek wrote the Book of Job, which contains many mysterious passages that Casey liked. Casey once said, "For, as the sons of God came together to reason, as recorded by Job, WHO recorded same? The Son of Man. Melchizedek wrote Job. 6. Joseph. Joseph was the son of Jacob, who became the Prince of Egypt. The story of Joseph appealed to Casey, not only for its Egyptian location, but its endorsement of dream guidance, and also for Joseph's escape from the pit, anticipating Jesus' resurrection. In fact, there are many parallels between the life of Joseph and Jesus. 7. Joshua. Joshua was the warrior who led the Israelites into the Promised Land. However, this incarnation of the Christ soul is more difficult to account for given his military campaigns described in the Bible. Jesus' suffering on the cross would certainly have paid his karmic debt for this transgression as well. But Casey also saw Joshua as a member of a family which had produced many highly skilled spiritual counselors. One of Joshua's roles was as a scribe for Moses, who psychically dictated much of the material from the books traditionally attributed to him. This explains how Joshua could have remembered to include such details as the creation of the universe and Moses' own death. Hebrews 4 verses 8 to 10 identifies Jesus as a better Joshua, as Joshua led Israel into the rest of Canaan, but Jesus leads the people of God into God's rest, salvation. Among the early church fathers, Joshua is considered a type of Jesus Christ. 8. Asaph. The Casey readings give little information about Asaph except that he was the music director and seer who served under David and Solomon. However, there is much more evidence of David as being a past life of Jesus than his music director Asaph. 9. Jeshua. Joshua was the high priest who helped organize the return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple, as recounted in the Book of Ezra and the Book of Nehemiah, and who is claimed by Casey to have compiled and translated the books of the Bible. 10. Zend. Casey identified Zend, also spelled Zen, Zon, Sen, or San, as the father of Zoroaster, the founder of the Zoroastrian religion, of Magi fame, and the source of inspiration for the Avesta, the sacred Zoroastrian scriptures. However, the word Zend in Zendavesta means commentary, and, in reality, Zoroaster's father was named Purushaspur. It appears the sleeping Casey was inspired by the Book of Esther and Matthew's story of the Magi to base this Zend personality upon. Of interest is the fact that it was during the Israelites' exile in Babylon when Judaism, and then Gnosticism, Christianity and Islam incorporated the Zoroastrian theological system of monotheism, the Messiah, the dualistic struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, angels and demons, heaven and hell, God and Satan, the Last Judgment and the resurrection of the dead. 11. Jesus. Jesus was the man who attained complete at-one-ment and human divine unity and therefore became the Christ. Note that Joshua, Jeshua, and the Jesus are really the same name. The name Jesus is a Latinization of the Aramaic Jeshua or Yeshua, which is in turn taken from the Hebrew Yehoshua, or Joshua. So the name Jesus refers to many heroes in the Hebrew Bible. Casey therefore assigned the sole entity Jesus to the same name for 3 separate incarnations. Casey also revealed that the Jesus of the New Testament was registered by his Essene school under the name of Jeshua. 12. Of the Second Coming. The Christ soul will walk the earth again as the Messiah foretold by the Hebrew prophets in order to usher in the so-called throne of David, i.e., the kingdom of heaven, on earth as revealed in Revelation 11 verse 15. Casey sometimes interpreted the second coming of Christ as being an internal, psychic event within the individual seeker, as in Casey's commentary on the Book of Revelation, and sometimes as the actual return of Jesus Christ in particular. In discussing the massive geological changes predicted for the last days, he adds that these will begin in those periods from 1958 to 1998, when these will be proclaimed as the periods when his light will be seen in the clouds. While this passage might be interpreted psychologically, elsewhere Casey insists that Jesus will return in the flesh and rule for 1,000 years as mentioned in Revelation 20 verses 1 to 3. During this 1,000-year time period, Casey states that souls from the lower afterlife realms will not be permitted to reincarnate in order to establish the kingdom of God on earth. Afterward, when the kingdom of God is established, souls from the lower afterlife realms will be permitted to reincarnate. According to Casey, as given, for 1,000 years he will walk and talk with men of every clime. Then in groups, in masses, and then they shall reign of the first resurrection for 1,000 years, for this will be when the changes materially come. Although Casey gives the year date of the entrance of the Messiah into this period as 1998, he also admits that no one knows the exact time of the second coming, since it cannot occur until his enemies, and the earth, are wholly in subjection to his will, his powers. A future incarnation of Jesus into flesh may not be necessary because Jesus has already transcended the necessity of reincarnating through his obedience of going to the cross. 3. The incarnations of Jesus in detail. According to Casey, the fall of man was an event recorded symbolically in Genesis where souls from heaven first descended to the earth plane to begin incarnating as humans. The first wave of souls to incarnate, known in the Bible as the sons of men, became entrapped in the earth plane accidentally, through their misuse of free will. These events gave rise to legends of the fall of the angels, and to mythical beasts of the kind described in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. The second wave of incarnations, known in the Bible as the sons of God, consisted of those souls led by Emilius, the Christ soul, who voluntarily became entrapped in order to assist the first wave of trapped souls. They accomplished this by steering the process of physical evolution in a way that created more appropriate physical forms for these souls. Casey places Emilius on Atlantis, but says that he did not physically incarnate until the human physical form had been created, at which time the Genesis accounts of Adam and Eve begin. Casey sometimes used the word Adam to also refer to the entire group of souls which had accompanied the Christ soul into incarnating into the earth plane and who incarnated as the 5 races of humanity on 5 separate continents. Adam, as the Christ soul, joined his twin soul Eve in allowing himself to be seduced by materiality himself. This is symbolized by his acceptance of the forbidden fruit. The other sons of God followed his lead and incarnated, and as a result were moved to express their materiality by interbreeding with the daughters of men, Genesis 6 verses 1 to 2, who were the Homo sapiens that evolved from ape men according to Darwin's theory of evolution. According to the Casey material and Christian Gnosticism, their banishment from the Garden of Eden was actually a great blessing because death and reincarnation are designed to draw our attention away from materiality and the flesh, and toward our true spiritual nature. Casey also identified Melchizedek as an incarnation of the Jesus entity. Melchizedek was the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God who shares bread and wine with Abraham in Genesis 14 verses 18 to 20. Melchizedek is also mentioned both in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 11q Melch, and the Nag Hammadi Codices, Nec 9:1, where he appears as a cosmic angelic figure similar to the risen Christ. Hebrews 5 verse 10 refers to Jesus as high priest after the order of Melchizedek. According to Casey, Melchizedek wrote the Book of Job, which contains many unusual verses that Casey would often quote from while in trance. For example, Casey stated, "For, as the sons of God came together to reason, as recorded by Job, WHO recorded same. The Son of Man. Melchizedek wrote Job." Casey also identified the biblical personality named Enoch to be a Jesus entity incarnate. Enoch is described in several pseudepigraphal writings as well as some Kabbalistic writings. The modern Bible has a brief mention of Enoch. "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Genesis 5 verses 18 to 24. The Book of Enoch described the fall of the angels into materiality, the beginning of the incarnation of souls from heaven. It also describes Enoch's several heavenly journeys where it is revealed to him the future until the time of the Messiah. Enoch is also taught traditional topics as angelology and the divine throne chariot. The Ethiopic Enoch introduces Enoch to a messianic figure referred to as the Son of Man. The Hebrew scripture known as Apocalypse of Enoch describes Enoch transfigured into an angel named Metatron. In the New Testament, Enoch is mentioned in Hebrews 11 verse 5 and Jude 14 to 15, with the latter passage apparently quoting from the pseudepigraphal Enochian literature. The fact that the Bible itself quotes from the Book of Enoch is evidence that Casey was correct about the book being a valid source for higher spiritual knowledge. Casey also identified the biblical personality named Joseph, son of Jacob, as an incarnation of the Jesus entity soul. Accordingly, Joseph's escape from the pit was not only a literal event, but a symbolic anticipation of Jesus' resurrection. Casey's identification of Joshua, the notorious genocidal leader of Israel in the Old Testament, as an incarnation of the Jesus entity is a little more difficult to believe. But Casey viewed Joshua's claim to fame as being the scribe for Moses who psychically dictated much of what is attributed to Moses. This interesting bit of information explains how Moses wrote about his own death. Another biblical personality named by Casey to be a Jesus entity incarnate is the high priest named Jeshua, who helped organize the return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple. See the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. According to Casey, this Jeshua is the one who compiled and translated the books of the Bible. In essence, Casey identifies all these biblical personalities to be psychic revelators. An interesting fact is that Joshua, Jeshua, and Jesus are really the same name. The name Jesus is a Latin version of the Aramaic name Jeshua or Yeshua. And Yeshua is Hebrew for Joshua or Yehoshua. Thus, Casey has assigned the soul entity Jesus to be incarnations of the three biblical characters having the same name. Casey also mentions that Jesus was an Essene who was registered by his Essene school under the name of Jeshua. Concerning the so-called second coming of Christ, which is really not the second, but Casey sometimes interpreted it to be an internal spiritual and psychic event within the individual. See Casey on the Book of Revelation. On other occasions, Casey interpreted it to be an actual return of Jesus Christ in physical form. When Casey gave his prophecies about the massive geological changes predicted to being around 2000 AD, he stated that these will begin in those periods from 58 to 98, when these will be proclaimed as the periods when his light will be seen in the clouds. Casey reading 39:76 to 15. This reading from Casey suggests that Jesus will appear in the sky and return to earth in bodily form. Casey stated that Jesus will walk the earth again. As given, for 1,000 years, he will walk and talk with men of every clime. Then in groups, in masses, and then they shall reign of the first resurrection for 1,000 years, for this will be when the changes materially come. Casey reading 364 to 8. Casey gave the year of the entrance of the Messiah into this period -1998. Casey reading 5748-5, he also mentions that no one knows the exact day of event because it cannot occur until his enemies, and the earth, are wholly in subjection to his will, his powers. Casey reading 5749-1. So this suggests that Jesus' return may not be a future incarnation in the flesh since Jesus has already transcended the need to reincarnate. 4. The Christ soul incarnation as Jesus in detail. 2 years after Casey's death in 1945, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Qumran. This remarkable archaeological discovery revealed a large amount of information about a religious sect around the time of Jesus referred to as the Essenes. And affirmed information provided by Casey. The word Essene is never used in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but most scholars accept that the Qumran sect was either identical or closely related to the Essenes of the classical authors such as Josephus and Pliny. According to Casey, Jesus was an Essene along with Mary and Joseph, who was affiliated with an Essene community based on Mount Carmel, which was a continuation of a school of the prophets begun by Elijah, Elisha, Samuel, and Melchizedek. Casey described the Essenes as an pious religious community of men and women whose purpose was to prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah. Archaeology does not reveal the meaning behind the word Essene, but Casey mentioned that it means expectancy. According to Josephus, the Essenes were known for divination, foretelling the future, which agrees with Casey's descriptions of them spending their time recording experiences of the supernatural or out of the ordinary experiences, whether in dreams, visions, voices, or whatnot. Casey reading 1472-1. Casey also mentioned that the Essenes were students of astrology, numerology, and reincarnation. The Dead Sea Scrolls describe the Essenes as an authoritarian, highly disciplined community that controlled every facet of members' lives. They had to give all their money and property over to the community after a year's probation. Their theology stressed a good versus evil duality. It also describes a conflict between a teacher of righteousness, a wicked priest, and the liar. They separated themselves from the outside world in an anticipated final war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. As for the Jesus connection to the Essenes, scholars believe the idea of Jesus being an Essene does not fit the personality and teachings of Jesus, despite the many interesting similarities between Jesus and the Qumran community. For example, scholars believe the Essenes wouldn't have approved of Jesus' bending of the moral standards, such as associating himself with prostitutes and tax collectors. It is also believed that John the Baptist was an Essene because of the similarities between himself and the Essene community. According to Casey, Jesus' mother Mary was chosen by the Essenes at the age of 4 to begin intensive spiritual training lasting 3 years in preparation for the conception of the Messiah. Her election as the mother of the Messiah occurs during a special ceremony in the temple at Mount Carmel in which an angel leads her by the hand to the altar. Remarkably, this Casey reading agrees with an apocryphal book entitled The Infancy Gospel of James, where Mary is presented to the Lord at the age of 3 when her father Joachim set her on the 3rd step of the altar, and the Lord God gave grace to her, and she received food from the hand of an angel. 325, Casey and the Infancy Gospel of James agree that Joseph was chosen to be Mary's husband by lot. They also agree that Joseph was much older than Mary. Casey gives their ages at the time of their marriage as 36 and 16, respectively. Casey and the Infancy Gospel of James agree that Jesus was born in a cave. 5. Jesus and Eastern mysticism. According to Casey, Jesus was 16 years old when his education about the ways of the ancient teachers began. First, he traveled to Egypt where, as an infant, Jesus was taken after his birth by his parents to flee Herod, as the Gospel of Matthew states. After spending time learning in Egypt, Jesus spent 3 years in India and finally a year in Persia. The idea that Jesus had spent his lost years wandering Asia did not originate with Casey. Its first proponent seems to have been the Russian war correspondent Nicholas Notovich, 1858–1916, who described his travels in British India in a book entitled The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, published in 1894. According to his book, Notovich was told by the chief lama of a monastery that their library contained records of a visit by Jesus in ancient times. The chief lama finally relented to Notovich's requests to examine the records. From 2 large bound volumes written in Tibetan, Notovich translated them through his interpreter as The Life of Saint Issa, Best of the Sons of Men. The text begins by summarizing the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, Israel's lapse into sin during the prophetic period, and the subsequent Roman occupation. But God has mercy on one poor couple, Mary and Joseph, whom he rewards by giving them a son, Issa, which is the Quranic name for Jesus. All is well until the boy turns 13 and the parents arrange a marriage for him. Issa left the parental house in secret, departed from Jerusalem, and with the merchant set out towards Sind, with the object of perfecting himself in the divine word and of studying the laws of the great Buddhas. 4:12-13. At 14, he encountered the erring worshippers of Jain, a reference to Jainism. Then he spent 6 years studying the Vedas and learned the art of exorcism and intercessory prayer. Issa rebuked Brahmin priests for upholding the caste system. Issa also would violate their customs by giving teachings to the lower castes. He is seen rejecting the authority of the Vedas and Puranas, denying the Trimurti and the incarnation of Brahma as Vishnu, Shiva, and other gods. It is written that Issa belittled idolatry and barely escaped India with his life. In Nepal, he grew proficient in Pali and spent 6 years studying Buddhist sutras. He condemned human and animal sacrifices, sun worship, the dualism of good and evil, and the Zoroastrian priesthood. The Zoroastrian priests seized him and abandoned him to the wilderness to be devoured by wild beasts, but he escapes anyway. 6. Jesus the man and Jesus as the Christ. Casey made a distinction between Jesus and the Christ. He said that Christhood is the goal which every human should strive for. Jesus was simply the first evolved human to attain it. Casey referred to Jesus as our elder brother and the pattern for our own spiritual growth. The Bible states that Christ fulfilled the law and, according to Casey, so can we. That is the entire purpose of Jesus' teaching. Casey wrote, "The law of God made manifest, that he becomes the law by manifesting same before man, and thus, as man, even as you becomes one with the Father." Casey reading 11:58-12. Because of Jesus' triumph over flesh and temptation, Jesus became the first of those that overcame death in the body, enabling him to so illuminate, to so revivify that body as to take it up again, even when those fluids of the body had been drained away by the nail holes in his hands, and by the spear piercing his side. Casey reading 1152-1. In essence, Casey described the Christ soul as the impelling force and core of truth behind all religions that teach that God is one.
Education of Mary and Elizabeth in Zoan, Egypt. The son of Herod, Archelaus, reigned in Jerusalem. He was a selfish, cruel king. He put to death all those who did not honor him. He called in council all the wisest men, and asked about the infant claimant to his throne. The council said that John and Jesus both were dead. Then he was satisfied. Now Joseph, Mary, and their son were down in Egypt, in Zoan, and John was with his mother in the Judean hills. Elihu and Salome sent messengers in haste to find Elizabeth and John. They found them. They brought them to Zoan. Now Mary and Elizabeth were marveling much because of their deliverance. Elihu said, "It is not strange. There are no happenings. Law governs all events. From olden times it was ordained that you should be with us, and in this sacred school be taught." Elihu and Salome took Mary and Elizabeth out to the sacred grove nearby, where they were wont to teach. Elihu said to Mary and Elizabeth, "You may esteem yourself thrice blessed, for you are chosen mothers of long-promised sons, who are ordained to lay a solid rock, a sure foundation stone, on which the temple of the perfect man shall rest, a temple that shall never be destroyed. We measure time by cycle ages, and the gate to every age we deem a milestone in the journey of the race. An age is past. The gate unto another age flies open at the touch of time. This is the preparation age of soul, the kingdom of Emmanuel, of Allah in man. And these, your sons, will be the first to tell the news and teach the gospel of goodwill to men and peace on earth." A mighty work is theirs, for carnal men want not the light. They love the dark, and when the light shines in the dark, they comprehend it not. We call these sons revealers of the light, but they must have the light before they can reveal the light. And you must teach your sons, and set their souls on fire with love and holy zeal, and make them conscious of their missions to the sons of men. Teach them that Allah and man are one, but that through carnal thoughts and words and deeds, man tore himself away from Allah, debased himself. Teach that the holy breath would make them one again, restoring harmony and peace. That naught can make them one but love. That Allah so loved the world, that he has clothed his Son in flesh, that man may comprehend. The only Savior of the world is love, and Jesus, Son of Mary, comes to manifest that love to men. Now, love cannot manifest until its way has been prepared, and naught can rend the rock, and bring down lofty hills and fill the valleys up, and thus prepare the way, but purity. But purity in life men do not comprehend, and so it too comes in flesh. And you, Elizabeth, are blessed because yours is purity made flesh, and he shall pave the way for love. This age will comprehend but little of the works of purity and love, but not a word is lost, for in the book of Allah's remembrance, a registry is made of every thought and word and deed. And when the world is ready to receive, lo, Allah will send a messenger to open the book and copy from its sacred pages all the messages of purity and love. Then every man of earth will read the words of life and language of his native land, and men will see the light, walk in the light, and be the light, and man again will be at one with Allah. Chapter 3. Elihu's Lessons, the Unity of Life. Again, Elihu met his pupils in the sacred grove and said, No man lives unto himself, for every living thing is bound by cords to every other living thing. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will love and not demand love in return. They will not do to other men what they would not have other men do unto them. There are two selves, the higher and the lower self. The higher self is human spirit clothed with soul, made in the form of Allah. The lower self, the carnal self, the body of desires, is a reflection of higher self, distorted by the murky ethers of the flesh. The lower self is an illusion and will pass away. The higher self is Allah and man and will not pass away. The higher self is the embodiment of truth. The lower self is truth reversed, and so is falsehood manifest. The higher self is justice, mercy, love, and right. The lower self is what the higher self is not. The lower self breeds hatred, slander, lewdness, murders, theft, and everything that harms. The higher self is mother of the virtues and the harmonies of life. The lower self is rich in promises, but poor in blessedness and peace. It offers pleasure, joy, and satisfying gain, but gives unrest, misery, and death. It gives men apples that are lovely to the eye and pleasant to the smell. Their cores are full of bitterness and gall. If you would ask me what to study, I would say, yourselves. And when you well have studied them, and then would ask me what to study next, I would reply, yourselves. He who knows well his lower self, knows the illusion of the world, knows of the things that pass away, and he who knows his higher self, know Allah, knows well the things that cannot pass away. Thrice blessed is the man who has made purity and love his very own. He has been ransomed from the perils of the lower self, and is himself his higher self. Men seek salvation from an evil, that they deem a living monster of the nether world, and they have gods that are but demons in disguise, all-powerful, yet full of jealousy and hate and lust, whose favors must be bought with costly sacrifice of fruits and of the lives of birds and animals and humankind. And yet these gods possess no ears to hear, no eyes to see, no heart to sympathize, no power to save. This evil is a myth. These gods are made of air, clothed with shadows of a thought. The only devil from which men must be redeemed is self, the lower self. If man would find his devil, he must look within. His name is self. If man would find his savior, he must look within. And when the demon self has been dethroned, the savior, love, will be exalted to the throne of power. The David of the light is purity, who slays the strong, Goliath of the dark, and seats the savior, love, upon the throne. Chapter 4. Death and Burial of Elizabeth. Matheno's Lessons. The Ministry of Death. When John was 12 years old, his mother died, and neighbors laid her body in a tomb among her kindred in the Hebron burying ground, and near to Zacharias' tomb. And John was deeply grieved. He wept. Matheno said, "It is not well to weep because of death. Death is no enemy of man. It is a friend who, when the work of life is done, just cuts the cord that binds the human boat to earth, that it may sail on smoother seas." No language can describe a mother's worth, and yours was tried and true, but she was not called hence until her tasks were done. The calls of death are always for the best, for we are solving problems there as well as here, and one is sure to find himself where he can solve his problems best. It is but selfishness that makes one wish to call again to earth departed souls. Then let your mother rest in peace. Just let her noble life be strength and inspiration unto you. A crisis in your life has come, and you must have a clear conception of the work that you were called to do. The sages of the ages call you harbinger. The prophets look to you and say, "He is Elijah come again." Your mission here is that of harbinger, for you will go before the Messiah's face to pave his way and make the people ready to receive their king. This readiness is purity of heart. None but the pure in heart can recognize the king. To teach men to be pure in heart, you must yourself be pure in heart, and word and deed. In infancy the vow for you was made, and you became a Nazirite. The razor shall not touch your face nor head, and you shall taste not wine, nor fiery drinks. Men need a pattern for their lives. They love to follow, not to lead. The man who stands upon the corners of the paths and points the way, but does not go, is just a pointer, and a block of wood can do the same. The teacher treads the way. On every span of ground he leaves his footprints, clearly cut, which all can see and be assured that he, their master, went that way. Men comprehend the inner life by what they see and do. They come to Allah through ceremonies and forms. And so when you would make men know that sins are washed away by purity in life, a rite symbolic may be introduced. In water wash the bodies of the people who would turn away from sin and strive for purity in life. This rite of cleansing is a preparation rite, and they who thus are cleansed comprise the temple of purity. And you shall say, "You men of Israel, here, reform and wash, become the sons of purity, and you shall be forgiven." This rite of cleansing and this temple are but symbolic of the cleansing of the soul, which does not come from outward show, but is the temple within. Now you may never point the way and tell the multitudes to do what you have never done, but you must go before and show the way. You are to teach that men must wash, so you must lead the way. Your body must be washed, symbolic of the cleansing of the soul. John said, Why need I wait? May I not go at once and wash? Matheno said, 'Tis well. And then they went down to the Jordan ford, and east of Jericho, just where the host of Israel crossed when first they entered Canaan. They tarried for a time. Matheno taught the harbinger, and he explained to him the inner meaning of the cleansing rite, and how to wash himself and how to wash the multitude. And in the river Jordan, John was washed. Then they returned unto the wilderness. Now in En-Gedi's hills, Matheno's work was done, and he and John went down to Egypt. They rested not until they reached the temple of Saqqara in the valley of the Nile. For many years Matheno was a master in this temple of the brotherhood, and when he told about the life of John, and of his mission to the sons of men, the Hierophant with joy received the harbinger, and he was called the brother Nazarite. For 18 years John lived and wrought within these temple gates, and here he conquered self, became a mastermind, and learned the duties of the harbinger. Chapter 5. After the feast, the homeward journey, the missing Jesus, the search for him. His parents find him in the temple. He goes with them to Nazareth, symbolic meaning of carpenter's tools. The great feast of the Pasch was ended, and the Nazarenes were journeying toward their homes, and they were in Samaria. And Mary said, Where is my son? No one had seen the boy. And Joseph sought among their kindred who were on their way to Galilee, but they had seen him not. Then Joseph, Mary, and a son of Zebedee returned, and sought through all Jerusalem, but they could find him not. And Mary asked the guards had they seen Jesus, a little boy about 12 years old. The guards replied, Yes, he is in the temple now disputing with the doctors of the law. And they went in, and found him as the guards had said. And Mary said, Why, Jesus, why do you treat your parents thus? Lo, we have sought 2 days for you. We feared that some great harm had overtaken you. And Jesus said, Do you not know that I must be about my Father's work? But he went round and pressed the hand of every doctor of the law and said, I trust that we meet again. And then he went forth with his parents on their way to Nazareth. And when they reached their home, he wrought with Joseph as a carpenter. One day, as he was bringing forth the tools for work, he said, These tools remind me of the ones we handle in the workshop of the mind, where things were made of thought, and where we build up character. We use the square to measure all our lines, to straighten out the crooked places of the way, and make the corners of our conduct square. We use the compass to draw circles around our passions and desires to keep them in the bounds of righteousness. We use the axe to cut away the knotty, useless and ungainly parts, and make the character symmetrical. We use the hammer to drive home the truth, and pound it in until it is a part of every part. We use the plane to smooth the rough, uneven surfaces of joint and block and board that go to build the temple for the truth. The chisel, line, the plummet, and the saw all have their uses in the workshop of the mind. And then this ladder with its trinity of steps, faith, hope, and love. On it we climb up to the dome of purity and life. And on the 12-step ladder we ascend until we reach the pinnacle of that which life is spent to build the temple of perfected man. Chapter 6. Life and works of Jesus in India among the Muslims. A royal prince of India, Ravana in the south, was at the Jewish feast. Ravana was a man of wealth, and he was just, and with a band of Brahmic priests, sought wisdom in the west. When Jesus stood among the Jewish priests and read and spoke, Ravana heard and was amazed. And when he asked who Jesus was, from whence he came and what he was, Chief Hillel said, We call this child the day star from on high, for he has come to bring to men a light, the light of life, to lighten up the way of men, and to redeem his people of Israel. And Hillel told Ravana all about the child, about the prophecies concerning him, about the wonders of the night when he was born, about the visit of the Magian priests, about the way in which he was protected from the wrath of evil men, about his flight to Egypt land, and how he then was serving with his father as a carpenter in Nazareth. Ravana was entranced and asked to know the way to Nazareth, that he might go and honor such a one as Son of Allah, and with his gorgeous train, he journeyed and came to Nazareth of Galilee. He found the object of his search, engaged in building dwellings for the sons of men. And when he first saw Jesus, he was climbing up a 12-stepped ladder, and he carried in his hands a compass, square, and axe. Ravana said, "All hail, most favored Son of Heaven." And at the inn, Ravana made a feast for all the people of the town, and Jesus and his parents were honored guests. For certain days Ravana was a guest in Joseph's home on Marmion Way. He sought to learn the secret of the wisdom of the sun, but it was all too great for him. And then he asked that he might be the patron of the child, might take him to the east, where he could learn the wisdom of the Brahms. And Jesus longed to go, that he might learn, and after many days his parents gave consent. Then, with proud heart, Ravana with his train began the journey towards the rising sun, and after many days they crossed the sand, and reached the province of Orissa and the palace of the prince. The Brahmic priests were glad to welcome home the prince. With favor they received the Jewish boy, and Jesus was accepted as a pupil in the temple Jagannath, and here he learned the Vedas and the Manic law. The Brahmic masters wondered at the clear conceptions of the child, and often were amazed when he explained to them the meaning of the law. Chapter 7. The Friendship of Jesus and Lammaeus. Jesus explains to Lammaeus the meaning of truth. Among the priests of Jagannath was one who loved the Jewish boy. Lammaeus Brahmas was the name by which the priest was known. One day as Jesus and Lammaeus walked alone in Plaza Jagannath, Lammaeus said, "My Jewish master, what is truth?" And Jesus said, "Truth is the only thing that changes not. In all the world there are two things. The one is truth, the other is falsehood, and falsehood that which seems to be. Now truth is aught and has no cause, and yet it is the cause of everything. Falsehood is naught, and yet it is the manifest of right. Whatever has been made will be unmade. That which begins must end. All things that can be seen by human eyes are manifests of aught, are not, and so must pass away. The things we see are but reflexes just appearing, while the ethers vibrate so and so, and when conditions change they disappear. The holy breath is truth, is that which was, and is, and evermore shall be. It cannot change nor pass away." Lammaeus said, "You answer well. Now what is man?" And Jesus said, "Man is the truth and falsehood strangely mixed. Man is the breath made flesh. So truth and falsehood are conjoined in him, and they strive. And naught goes down, and man as truth abides." Again Lammaeus asked, "What do you say of power?" And Jesus said, "It is a manifest, is the result of force. It is but naught. It is illusion, nothing more. Force changes not, but power changes as the ethers change. Force is the will of Allah, and is omnipotent, and power is that will and manifest, directed by the breath. There is power in the winds, a power in the waves, a power in the lightning stroke, a power in the human arm, a power in the eye. The ethers cause these powers to be, and thought of Elohim, of angel, man, or other thinking things, directs the force. When it has done its work, the power is no more. Again Lamaius asked, "Of understanding, what have you to say?" And Jesus said, "It is the rock on which man builds himself. It is the gnosis of the ought and of the naught, of falsehood and of truth. It is the knowledge of the lower self, the sensing of the powers of man himself." Again Lamaius asked, "Of wisdom, what have you to say?" And Jesus said, "It is the consciousness that man is aught, that Allah and man are one, that naught is naught, that power is but illusion, that heaven and earth and hell are not above, around, below, but in, which in the light of aught becomes the naught, and Allah is all." Lamaius asked, "Pray, what is faith?" And Jesus said, "Faith is the surety of the omnipotence of Allah and man, the certainty that man will reach the deific life. Salvation is a ladder reaching from the heart of man to the heart of Allah. It has 3 steps. Belief is first, and this is what man thinks perhaps is truth. And faith is next. This is what man knows is truth. Fruition is the last, and this is man himself, the truth. Belief is lost in faith, and in fruition is lost. And man is saved when he has reached deific life, when he and Allah are one. Chapter 8. Jesus reveals to the people of their sinful ways. In all the cities of Larissa, Jesus taught. At Katak, by the riverside, he taught, and thousands of the people followed him. One day a car of Jagannath was hauled along by scores of frenzied men, and Jesus said, "Behold, a form without a spirit passes by, a body with no soul, a temple with no altar fires. This car of Krishna is an empty thing, for Krishna is not there. This car is but an idol of a people drunk on wine of carnal things. Allah lives not in the noise of tongues. There is no way to him from an idol shrine. Allah's meeting place with man is in the heart, and in a still small voice he speaks, and he who hears is still." And all the people said, "Teach us to know the Holy One who speaks within the heart, Allah of the still small voice." And Jesus said, "The holy breath cannot be seen with mortal eyes, nor can men see the spirits of the Holy One. But in their image man was made, and he who looks into the face of man looks at the image of the Allah who speaks within. And when man honors man, he honors Allah. And what man does for man, he does for Allah. And you must bear in mind that when man harms in thought or word or deed another man, he does a wrong to Allah. If you would serve the Allah who speaks within the heart, just serve your near of kin and those that are no kin, the stranger at your gates, the foe who seeks to do you harm. Assist the poor and help the weak. Do harm to none, and covet not what is not yours. Then, with your tongue the Holy One will speak, and he will smile behind your tears, will light your countenance with joy, and fill your hearts with peace." And when the people asked, "To whom shall we bring gifts? Where shall we offer sacrifice?" And Jesus said, "Our Father Allah asks not for needless waste of plant, of grain, of dove, of lamb. That which you burn on any shrine you throw away. No blessings can attend the one who takes the food from hungry mouths to be destroyed by fire. When you would offer sacrifice unto Allah, just take your gift of grain or meat and lay it on the table of the poor. From it an incense will arise to heaven, which will return to you with blessedness. Tear down your idols. They can hear you not. Turn all your sacrificial altars into fuel for the flames. Make human hearts your altars, and burn your sacrifices with the fire of love." And all the people were entranced, and would have worshipped Jesus as a god. But Jesus said, I am your brother man, just come to show the way to Allah. You shall not worship man. Praise Allah, the Holy One. Chapter 9. Jesus attends a feast in Bahar, and here he taught human equality. The fame of Jesus as a teacher spread through all the land, and people came from near and far to hear his words of truth. At Bahar, on the sacred river of the Brahms, he taught for many days, and Ak, a wealthy man of Bahar, made a feast in honor of his guest, and he invited everyone to come, and many came, among them thieves, extortioners, and courtesans. And Jesus sat with them and taught, but they who followed him were much grieved, because he sat with thieves and courtesans, and they upbraided him. They said, Rabboni, Master of the Wise, this day will be an evil day for you. The news will spread that you consort with courtesans, and men will shun you as they shun an asp. And Jesus answered them and said, A master never screens himself for sake of reputation or of fame. These are but worthless baubles of the day. They arise and sink, like empty bottles on a stream. They are illusions and will pass away. They are the indices to what the thoughtless think. They are the noise that people make, and shallow men judge merit by the noise. Allah and all master men judge men by what they are, and not by what they seem to be, not by their reputation and their fame. These courtesans and thieves are children of my Father Allah. Their soul are just as precious in his sight as yours, or of the Brahmic priests, and some of them have solved much harder sums than you have solved, you men who look at them with scorn. Yes, they are sinners, and confess their guilt while you were guilty, but are shrewd enough to have a polished coat to cover up your guilt. Suppose you men who scorn the courtesans, these drunkards and these thieves, who know that you are pure in heart and life, that you are better far than they. Stand forth that men may know just who you are. The sin lies in the wish, in the desire, not in the act. You covet other people's wealth. You look at charming forms, and deep within your hearts you lust for them. Deceit you practice every day, and wish for gold, for honor, and for fame, just for your selfish selves. The man who covets is a thief, and she who lusts is a courtesan. You who are none of these, speak out. Nobody spoke. The accusers held their peace. And Jesus said, The proof this day is all against those who have accused. The pure in heart do not accuse. The vile in heart who want to cover up their guilt with holy smoke of piety are ever-loathing drunkard, thief, and courtesans. This loathing and this scorn is mockery, for if the tinseled coat of reputation could be torn away, the loud professor would be found to revel in his lust, deceit, and many forms of secret sin. The man who spends his time in pulling other people's weeds can have no time to pull his own, and all the choicest flowers of life will soon be choked and die, and nothing will remain but darnel, thistles, and burrs. And Jesus spoke a parable. He said, Behold, a farmer had great fields of ripened grain, and when he looked he saw that blades of many stalks of wheat were bent and broken down. And when he sent his reapers forth, he said, We will not save the stalks of wheat that have the broken blades. Go forth and cut and burn the stalks with broken blades. And after many days he went to measure up his grain, but not a kernel could he find. And then he called the harvesters and said to them, Where is my grain? They answered him and said, We did according to your word. We gathered up and burned the stalks with broken blades, and not a stalk was left to carry to the barn. And Jesus said, If Allah saves only those who have no broken blades, who have been perfected in his sight, who will be saved? And the accusers hung their heads in shame, and Jesus went his way. Chapter 10. Jesus spake on the unity of Allah and man to the Hindus. Benares is the sacred city of the Brahms, and in Benares Jesus taught. Udraka was his host. Udraka made a feast in honor of his guests, and many high-born Hindu priests and scribes were there. And Jesus said to them, "With much delight, I speak to you concerning life, the brotherhood of life. The universal Allah is one, yet he is more than one. All things are one. By the sweet breath of Allah, all life is bound in one. So if you touch a fiber of a living thing, you send a thrill from the center to the outer bounds of life. And when you crush beneath your foot the meanest worm, you shake the throne of Allah and cause the sword of life to tremble in its sheath. The bird sings out its song for men, and men vibrate in unison to help it sing. The ant constructs her home, the bee its sheltering comb. The spider weaves her web, and flowers breathe to them a spirit in their sweet perfume that gives them strength to toil. Now, men and birds and beasts and creeping things are deities, made flesh, and how dare men kill anything? It is cruelty that makes the world awry, when men have learned that when they harm a living thing, they harm themselves. They surely will not kill, nor cause a thing that Allah has made to suffer pain. A lawyer said, "I pray to Jesus, tell who is this Allah you speak about? Where are his priests, his temples and his shrines?" And Jesus said, "The Allah I speak about is everywhere. He cannot be compassed with walls, nor hedged about with bounds of any kind. All people worship Allah, the One, but all the people see him not alike. This universal Allah is wisdom, will, and love. All men see not the triune Allah. One sees him as Allah of might, mother is Allah of thought, another is Allah of love. A man's ideal is his God, and so his man unfolds. His God unfolds. Man's God today, tomorrow is not God. The nations of the earth see Allah from different points of view, and so he does not seem the same to everyone. Man names the part of Allah he sees, and this to him is all of Allah. And every nation sees a part of Allah, and every nation has a name for Allah. You Brahmins call him Parabrahm. In Egypt, he is Thoth, and Zeus is his name in Greece. Jehovah is his Hebrew name, but everywhere he is the causeless cause, the rootless root from which all things have grown. When men are afraid of Allah and take him for a foe, they dress up other men in fancy garbs and call them priests, and charge them to restrain the wrath of Allah by prayers. And when they fail to win his favor by their prayers, to buy him off with sacrifice of animals or birds. When man sees Allah as one with him, as Father Allah, he needs no middleman, no priest to intercede. He goes straight up to him and says, "My Father God, Allah," and then he lays his hand in Allah's own hand, and all is well. And this is Allah. You are, each one, a priest, just for yourself, and sacrifice of blood Allah does not want. Just give your life in sacrificial service to all of life, and Allah is pleased. When Jesus had thus said, he stood aside. The people were amazed, but strove among themselves. Some said, "He is inspired by holy Brahm," and others said, "He is insane," and others said, He is obsessed. He speaks as devils speak. But Jesus tarried not. Among the guests was one, a tiller of the soil, a generous soul, a seeker after truth, who loved the words that Jesus spoke. And Jesus went with him, and in his home abode. Chapter 11. Jesus and Bharata. Together they read the sacred books. Among the Buddhist priests was one who saw a lofty wisdom in the words that Jesus spoke. It was Bharata Arabo. Together, Jesus and Bharata read the Jewish Psalms and Prophets, read the Vedas, the Avesta, and the wisdom of Gautama. And as they read and talked about the possibilities of man, Bharata said, "Man is the marvel of the universe. He is part of everything. For he has been a living thing on every plane of life. Time was when men was not, and then he was but a formless substance in the molds of time, and then a protoplast. By universal law, all things tend upward to a state of perfectness. The protoplast evolved, becoming worm, then reptile, bird, and beast, and then at last it reached the form of man. Now, man himself is mind, and mind is here to gain perfection by experience, and mind is often manifest in fleshly form, and in the form best suited to its growth. So mind may manifest as worm, or bird, or beast, or man. The time will come when everything of life will be evolved unto the state of perfect man, and after man is man in perfectness. He will evolve to higher forms of life." And Jesus said, "Bharata Arabo, who taught you this? That mind, which is the man, may manifest in flesh of beast or bird or creeping thing." Bharata said, "From times which man remembers not, our priests have told us so, and so we know." And Jesus said, "Enlightened Arabo, are you a mastermind, and do not know that man knows naught by being told? Man may believe what others say, but thus he never knows. If man would know, he must himself be what he knows. Do you remember, Arbo, when you were ape, or bird, or worm? Now, if you have no better proving of your plea than that the priests have told you so, you do not know. You simply guess. Regard not then what any man has said. Let us forget the flesh, and go with mind into the land of fleshless things. Mind never does forget, and backward through the ages masterminds can trace themselves, and thus they know. Time never was when man was not. That which begins will have an end. If man was not, the time will come when he will not exist. From Allah's own record book we read, the triune Allah breathed forth, and stood 7 spirits before his face. The Hebrews call these 7 spirits Elohim, and these are they who, in their boundless power, created everything that is, or was. These spirits of the triune Allah moved on the face of boundless space, and 7 others were, and every other had its form of life. These forms of life were but the thought of Allah, clothed in the substance of their ether planes. Men call these ether planes the planes of protoplast, of earth, of plant, of beast, of man, of angel, and of cherubim. These planes, with all their teeming thoughts of Allah, are never seen by eyes of man and flesh. They are composed of substance far too fine for fleshy eyes to see, and still they constitute the soul of things, and with the eyes of soul, all creatures see these ether planes, and all forms of life, because all forms of life on every plane are thoughts of Allah. All creatures think, and every creature is possessed of will, and, in its measure, has the power to choose. And in their native plains all creatures are supplied with nourishment from the ethers of their plains. And so it was with every living thing until the will became a sluggish will. And then the ethers of the protoplast, the earth, the plant, the beast, the man, began to vibrate very slow. The ethers all became more dense, and all the creatures of these plains were clothed with coarser garbs of flesh, which men can see, and thus this coarser manifest, which men call physical, appeared. And this is what is called the fall of man. But man fell not alone, for protoplast and earth and plant and beast were all included in the fall. The angels and the cherubim fell not. Their wills were ever strong, and so they held the ethers of their planes in harmony with Allah. Now, when the ether reached the rate of atmosphere, and all the creatures of these planes must get their food from atmosphere, the conflict came, and that which the finite man called survival of the best became the law. The stronger ate the bodies of the weaker manifests, and here is where the carnal law of evolution had its rise. And now man, in his utter shamelessness, strikes down and eats the beasts. The beast consumes the plant thrives on the earth absorbs the protoplast. In yonder kingdom of the soul, this carnal evolution is not known, and the great work of master minds is to restore the heritage of man, to bring him back to his estate that he has lost, when he again will live upon the ethers of his native plane. The thoughts of Allah change not. The manifests of life unfold. The manifests of life on every plane unfold into perfection of their kind. And as the thought of Allah can never die, there is no death to any being of the seven ethers of the seven spirits of the triune Allah. And so, an earth is never plant, a beast or bird or creeping thing is never man, and man is not and cannot be a beast or bird or creeping thing. The time will come when all these seven manifests will be absorbed, and man and beast and plant and earth and protoplast will be redeemed. Bharata was amazed. The wisdom of the Jewish sage was a revelation unto him. Now Vijayapati, wisest of the Indian sages, chief of Temple Kapivastu, heard Bharata speak to Jesus of the origin of man, and heard the answer of the Hebrew prophet, and he said, "You priests of Kapivastu, hear me speak. We stand today upon a crest of time. 6 times ago, a master soul was born who gave a glorious light to man, and now a master sage stands here in the temple Kapivastu. The Hebrew prophet is the rising star of wisdom, deified. He brings to us a knowledge of the secret things of Allah, and all the world will hear his words, will heed his words, and glorify his name. You priests of Temple Kapivastu, stay, be still, and listen when he speaks. He is the living oracle of Allah." And all the priests gave thanks and praised the Buddha of enlightenment. Chapter 12. Jesus teaches the common people at a spring, tells them how to obtain eternal happiness. In silent meditation, Jesus sat beside a flowing spring. It was a holy day, and many people of the servant caste were near the place. And Jesus saw the hard-drawn lines of toil on every brow, in every hand. There was no look of joy in any face. Not one of all the group could think of anything but toil. And Jesus spoke to one and said, "Why are you all so sad? Have you no happiness in life?" The man replied, "We scarcely know the meaning of that word. We toil to live, and hope for nothing else but toil, and bless the day when we can cease our toil, and lay down and rest in Buddha's city of the dead. And Jesus' heart was stirred with pity, and with love for these poor toilers, and he said, "Toil should not make a person sad. Men should be happiest when they toil. When hope and love are back of toil, then all of life is filled with joy and peace, and this is heaven. Do you not know that such a heaven is for you?" The man replied, "Of heaven we have heard, but then it is so far away, and we must live so many lives before we can reach that place." And Jesus said, "My brother man, your thoughts are wrong. Your heaven is not far away, and it is not a place of metes and bounds, is not a country to be reached. It is a state of mind. Allah never made a heaven for man. He never made a hell. We are creators, and we make our own. Now cease to seek for heaven in the sky. Just open up the windows of the hearts, and like a flood of light, a heaven will come and bring a boundless joy. Then toil will be no cruel task." The people were amazed, and gathered close to hear this strange young master speak, imploring him to tell them more about the Father, God Allah, about the heaven that men can make on earth, about the boundless joy. And Jesus spoke a parable. He said, "A certain man possessed a field. The soil was hard and poor. By constant toil, he scarcely could provide enough of food to keep his family from want. One day, a miner, who could see beneath the soil, and passing on his way, saw this poor man and his unfruitful field. He called the weary toiler, and he said, 'My brother, know you not that just below the surface of your barren field, rich treasures lie concealed? You plow and sow and reap in a scanty way, and day by day you tread upon a mine of gold and precious stones. This wealth lies not upon the surface of the ground, but if you will dig away the rocky soil and delve down deep into the earth, you need no longer till the soil for naught.' The man believed, 'The miner surely knows, and I will find the treasures hidden in my field.' And then he dug away the rocky soil, and deep down in the earth he found a mine of gold. And Jesus said, 'The sons of men are toiling hard on desert plains, and burning sands and rocky soils, are doing what their fathers did, not dreaming they can do aught else. Behold, a master comes and tells them of a hidden wealth, that underneath the rocky soil of carnal things are treasures that no man can count, that in the heart the richest gems abound, that he who wills may open the door and find them all.' And then the people said, 'Make known to us the way, that we may find the wealth that lies within the heart.' And Jesus opened up the way. The toilers saw another side of life, and toil became a joy." Chapter 13. Life and Works of Jesus in Egypt among the Gentiles. Jesus, with Elihu and Salome in Egypt, tells the story of his journeys. Elihu and Salome praise Allah. Jesus goes to the temple in Heliopolis and is received as a pupil. And Jesus came to Egypt land, and all was well. He tarried not upon the coast. He went at once to Zoan, home of Elihu and Salome, who 25 years before had taught his mother in their sacred school, and there was joy when met these three. When last the son of Mary saw these sacred groves, he was a babe, and now a man grown strong by buffeting of every kind, a teacher who had stirred the multitudes in many lands. And Jesus told the aged teachers all about his life, about his journeyings in foreign lands, about the meetings with the masters, and about his kind receptions by the multitudes, Elihu and Salome heard his story with delight. They lifted up their eyes to heaven and said, Our Father, God Allah, let now thy servants go in peace, for we have seen the glory of Allah, and we have talked with him, the messenger of love, and of the covenant of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Through him shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Through him, Emmanuel. And Jesus stayed in Zoan many days, and then went forth unto the city of the sun, that men call Heliopolis, and sought admission to the temple of the sacred brotherhood. The council of the brotherhood convened, and Jesus stood before the Hierophant. He answered all the questions that were asked, with clearness and with power. The Hierophant exclaimed, Rabboni of the Rabbinate, why come you here? Your wisdom is the wisdom of the gods. Why seek for wisdom in the halls of men? And Jesus said, In every way of earth life I would walk. In every hall of learning I would sit. The heights that any man has gained, these I would gain. What any man has suffered I would meet, that I may know the griefs, the disappointments, and the sore temptations of my brother man, that I may know just how to succor those in needs. I pray you, brothers, let me go into your dismal crypts, and I would pass the hardest of your tests. The Master said, Take then the vow of secret brotherhood. And Jesus took the vow of secret brotherhood. Again the Master spoke. He said, The greatest heights are gained by those who reach the greatest depths, and you shall reach the greatest depths. The guide then led the way, and in the fountain Jesus bathed. And when he had been clothed in proper garb, he stood again before the Hierophant. Chapter 14. The Ministry of John the Harbinger. John, the Harbinger, returns to Hebron, lives as a hermit in the wilds, visits Jerusalem, and speaks to the people. It came to pass when John, the son of Zacharias and Elizabeth, had finished all his studies in the Egyptian schools, he returned to Hebron, where he abode for certain days. And then he sought the wilderness and made his home in David's cave, where many years before he was instructed by the Egyptian sage. Some people called him Hermit of Engedi, and others said, He is the wild man of the hills. He clothed himself with skins of beasts. His food was carobs, honey, nuts, and fruits. When John was 30 years of age, he went into Jerusalem, and in the marketplace he sat in silence 7 days. The common people and the priests, the scribes and Pharisees came out in multitudes to see the silent hermit of the hills, but none were bold enough to ask him who he was. But when his silent past was done, he stood forth in the midst of all and said, Behold, the king has come. The prophets told of him. The wise men long have looked for him. Prepare, O Israel. Prepare to meet your king. And that was all he said. And then he disappeared, and no one knew where he had gone. And there was great unrest through all Jerusalem. The rulers heard the story of the hermit of the hills, and they sent couriers forth to talk with him, that he might know about the coming king. But they could find him not. And after certain days he came again into the marketplace, and all the city came to hear him speak. He said, Be not disturbed, you rulers of the state. The coming king is no antagonist. He seeks no place on earthly throne. The eyes of men shall see it not, and none can enter but the pure in heart. Prepare, O Israel, prepare to meet your king. Again, the hermit disappeared. The people strove to follow him, but he had drawn a veil about his form, and men could see him not. Jewish feast day came. Jerusalem was filled with Jews and proselytes from every part of Palestine, And John stood in the temple court and said, "Prepare, O Israel, prepare to meet your king. So you have lived in sin. The poor cry in your streets, and you regard them not. Your neighbors, who are they? You have defrauded friends and foes alike. You worship Allah with voice and lip. Your hearts are far away and set on gold. Your priests have bound upon the people burdens far too great to bear. They live in ease upon the hard-earned wages of the poor. Your lawyers, doctors, scribes are useless cumberers of the ground. They are but tumors on the body of the state. They toil not, neither do they spin, yet they consume the profits of your marts of trade. Your rulers are adulterers, extortioners, and thieves, regarding not the rights of any man. And robbers ply their calling in the sacred hills. The holy temple you have sold to thieves. Their dens are in the sacred places set apart for prayer. Hear, hear, you people of Jerusalem. Reform, turn from your evil ways, or Allah will turn from you, and heathen from afar will come, and what is left of all your honor and your fame will pass in one short hour. Prepare, Jerusalem, prepare to meet your king." He said no more. He left the court, and no one saw him go. The priests, the doctors, and the scribes were all in rage. They sought for John, intent to do him harm. They found him not. Chapter 15. Divine Ministry of Jesus. Jesus goes to the wilderness for self-examination, where he remains 40 days, is subjected to 3 temptations. He overcomes, returns to the camps of John, and begins teaching. The harbinger had paved the way. The Logos had been introduced to men as love made manifest, and he must now begin his divine ministry. And he went forth into the wilderness to be alone with Allah, that he might look into his inner heart and note its strength and worthiness. And with himself he talked. He said, "My lower self is strong. By many ties I am bound down to carnal life. Have I the strength to overcome and give my life a willing sacrifice for men? When I shall stand before the face of men, and they demand a proof of my messiahship, what will I say?" And then the tempter came and said, "If you be Son of Allah, command these stones to turn to bread." And Jesus said, "Who is it that demands a test? It is no sign that one is Son of Allah because he does a miracle. The devils can do mighty things. Did not the Gentile magicians do great things before the Pharaoh? My words and deeds in all the walks of life shall be the proof of my messiahship." And then the tempter said, "If you will go into Jerusalem, and from the temple pinnacle cast down yourself to earth, the people will believe that you are the Messiah sent from Allah. This you can surely do, for did not David say, 'He gives his angels charge concerning you, and with their will they uphold, lest you should fall?' And Jesus said, 'I may not tempt the Lord, my God, Allah.' And then the tempter said, 'Look forth upon the world. Behold its honors and its fame. Behold its pleasures and its wealth. If you will give your life for these, they shall be yours.' But Jesus said, 'Away from me all tempting thoughts. My heart is fixed. I spurn this carnal self with all its vain ambition and its pride.' For 40 days did Jesus wrestle with his carnal self. His higher self prevailed. He then was hungry, but his friends had found him, and they ministered to him. Then Jesus left the wilderness, and in the consciousness of holy breath, he came unto the camps of John and taught. Chapter 16. Pilate's final effort to release Jesus fails. He washes his hands in feigned innocence, delivers Jesus to the Jews for execution. The Jewish soldiers drive him to Calvary. A superstitious people are the Jews. They have a faith that they have borrowed from the idol worshippers of other lands, that at the end of every year, they may heap all their sins upon the head of some man set apart to bear their sins. The man becomes a scapegoat for the multitudes, and they believe that when they drive him forth into the wilds, or into foreign lands, they are released from sins. So every spring before the feast, they choose a prisoner from the prisons of the land, and by a form their own, they fain would make him bear their sins away. Among the Jewish prisoners in Jerusalem were 3 who were the leaders of a vile, seditious band, who had engaged in thefts and murders and rapine, and who had been sentenced to be crucified. Barabbas and Josiah was among the men who were to die. But Barabbas was rich, and he had bought off priests the boon to be scapegoat for the people at the coming feast, and he was anxiously in waiting for his hour to come. Now, Pilate thought to turn this superstition to account to save the Lord Jesus. And so he went again before the Jews and said, "You men of Israel, according to my custom, I will release to you today a prisoner who shall bear your sins away. This man you drive into the wilds or into foreign lands, and you have asked me to release Barabbas, who has been proven guilty of the murder of a score of men. Now, hear me, men. Let Jesus be released, and let Barabbas pay his debt upon the cross. Then you can send this Jesus to the wilds, and hear no more of him." At what the ruler said, the people were enraged, and they began to plot to tear the Roman palace down and drive in exile Pilate and his household and his guards. When Pilate was assured that civil war would follow if he heeded not the wishes of the mob, he took a bowl of water, and in the presence of the multitude, he washed his hands and said, "This man whom you accuse is son of the Most High Allah, and I proclaim my innocence. If you would shed his blood is on your hands, and not on mine." And then the Jews exclaimed, "And let his blood be on our hands, and on our children's hands." And Pilate trembled like a leaf in fear. Barabbas he released, and as the Lord stood forth before the mob, the ruler said, "Behold your king, and would you put to death your king?" The Jews replied, "He is no king. We have no king but great Tiberius." Now, Pilate would not give consent that Roman soldiers should imbue their hands in blood of innocents, and so the chief priests and the Pharisees took counsel what to do with Jesus. Caiaphas has said, "We cannot crucify this man. He must be stoned to death, and nothing more." And then the rabble said, "Make haste, let him be stoned." And when they led him forth toward the hill beyond the city's gates, where criminals were put to death, the rabble could not wait until they reached the place of skulls. As soon as they had passed the city gates, they rushed upon him, smote him with their hands. They spit upon him, stoned him, and he fell upon the ground. And one, a man of Allah, stood forth and said, "Isaiah said, he shall be bruised for our transgressions, and by his stripes we shall be healed." As Jesus laid all bruised and mangled on the ground, a high priest called out, "Stay, stay, you men. Behold, the guards of Herod come, and they will crucify this man." And there, beside the city's gate, they found Barabbas' cross. And then the frenzied mob cried out, "Let him be crucified." Caiaphas and the other ruling Jews came forth and gave consent. And then they lifted Jesus from the ground, and at the point of swords they drove him on. A man named Simon from Cyrene, a friend of Jesus, was near the scene. And since the bruised and wounded Jesus could not bear his cross, they laid it on the shoulders of this man and made him bear it on to Calvary. Chapter 17. Jesus appears fully materialized before Apollo and the Silent Brotherhood in Greece, appears to Claudia and Juliet on the Tiber near Rome, appears to the priest in the Egyptian temple at Heliopolis. Apollo, with the Silent Brotherhood of Greece, was sitting in a Delphian grove. The oracle had spoken loud and long. The priests were in the sanctuary, and as they looked, the oracle became a blaze of light. It seemed to be on fire, and all consumed. The priests were filled with fear. They said, "A great disaster is to come. Our gods are mad. They have destroyed our oracle." But when the flames had spent themselves, a man stood on the oracle's pedestal and said, "Allah speaks to man, not by an oracle of wood and gold, but by the voice of man. The gods have spoken to the Greeks and kindred tongues through images made by man, but Allah, the One, now speaks to man through Jesus, the only Son, who was, and is, and evermore will be. This oracle shall fail. The living oracle of Allah, the One, will not fail." Apollo knew the man who spoke. He knew it was the Nazarene who once had taught the wise men in the Acropolis, and had rebuked the idol worshippers upon the Athens beach. And in a moment, Jesus stood before Apollo and the Silent Brotherhood and said, "Behold, for I have risen from the dead with gifts for men. I bring to you the title of your vast estate. All power in heaven and earth is mine. To you I give all power in heaven and earth. Go forth and teach the nations of the earth the gospel of the resurrection of the dead, and of eternal life through Jesus, the love of Allah made manifest to men." And then he clasped Apollo's hand and said, "My human flesh was changed to higher form by love divine, and I can manifest in flesh, or in the higher planes of life at will. What I can do, all men can do. Go teach the gospel of the omnipotence of man." Then Jesus disappeared, but Greece and Crete and all the nations heard. Claudius and Juliet, his wife, lived on the Palatine in Rome, and they were servants of Tiberius, but they had been in Galilee, had walked with Jesus by the sea, had heard his words and seen his power, and they believed that he was Jesus made manifest. Now Claudius and his wife were on the Tiber in a little boat. A storm swept from the sea. The boat was wrecked, and Claudius and his wife were sinking down to death. And Jesus came and took them by the hands and said, "Claudius and Juliet, arise and walk with me upon the waves." And they arose and walked with him upon the waves. 1,000 people saw 3 walk on the waves, and saw them reach the land, and they were all amazed. And Jesus said, "You men of Rome, I am the resurrection and the life. They that are dead shall live, and many that shall live will never die. By mouth of gods and demigods, Allah spoke unto your fathers long ago, but now he speaks to you through perfect man. He sent his Son, Jesus, in human flesh to save the world. And as I lifted from the watery grave and saved these servants of Tiberius, so Jesus will lift the sons and daughters of the human race, yea, every one of them, from darkness and from graves of carnal things, to light and everlasting life. I am the manifest of love raised from the dead. Behold my hands, my feet, my side which carnal men have pierced. Claudius and Juliet, whom I have saved from death, are my ambassadors to Rome, and they will point the way and preach the gospel of the holy breath and the resurrection of the dead. And that was all he said, but Rome and all of Italy heard. The priests of Heliopolis were in their temple, met to celebrate the resurrection of their brother Nazarite. They knew that he had risen from the dead. The Nazarite appeared and stood upon a sacred pedestal on which no man had ever stood. This was an honor that had been reserved for him, who first would demonstrate the resurrection of the dead. And Jesus was the first of all the human race to demonstrate the resurrection of the dead. When Jesus stood upon the sacred pedestal, the Master stood and said, "All hail!" The great bells of the temple rang, and all the temple was ablaze with light. And Jesus said, "All honor to the masters of this temple of the sun. In flesh of man there is the innocence of the resurrection of the dead. This essence, quickened by the holy breath, will raise the substance of the body to a higher tone, and make it like the substance of the bodies of the plains above, which human eyes cannot behold. There is a holy ministry in death. The essence of the body cannot be quickened by the holy breath until the fix is solved. The body must disintegrate, and this is death. And then upon these pliant substances, Allah breathes, just as he breathed upon the chaos of the deep when worlds were formed. And life springs forth from death. The carnal form is changed to form divine. The will of man makes possible the action of the holy breath. When will of man and will of Allah are one, the resurrection is a fact. In this we have the chemistry of mortal life, the ministry of death, the mystery of deific life. My human life was wholly given to bring my will to tune with the deific will. When this was done, my earth tasks all were done. And you, my brother, know full well the foes I had to meet. You know about my victories in Gethsemane, my trials in the courts of men, my death upon the cross. You know that all my life was one great drama for the sons of men, a pattern for the sons of men. I lived to show the possibilities of man. What I have done, all men can do, and what I am, all men shall be. The masters looked. The form upon the sacred pedestal had gone, but every temple priest and every living creature said, "Praise Allah." Chapter 18. The Resurrection of Jesus. Pilate places the Roman seal upon the stone door of the tomb. At midnight, a company of the Silent Brothers march about the tomb. The soldiers are alarmed. Jesus preaches to the spirits in prison. Early Sunday morning, he rises from the tomb. The soldiers are bribed by the priests to say that the disciples had stolen the body. The tomb in which they laid the body of the Lord was in a garden, rich with flowers, the garden of Siloam, and Joseph's home was near. Before the watch began, Caiaphas sent a company of priests out to the garden of Siloam, that they might be assured that Jesus' body was within the tomb. They rolled away the stone. They saw the body there, and then they placed the stone again before the door. And Pilate sent his scribe, who placed upon the stone the seal of Rome, in such a way that he who moved the stone would break the seal. To break this Roman seal meant death to him who broke the seal. The Jewish soldiers all were sworn to faithfulness, and then the watch began. At midnight all was well, but suddenly the tomb became a blaze of light, and down the garden walked a troop of white-clad soldiers marched in single file. They came up to the tomb, and marched and countermarched before the door. The Jewish soldiers were alert. They thought his friends had come to steal the body of the Nazarene. The captain of the guard cried out to charge. They charged, but not a white-clad soldier fell. They did not even stop. They marched and countermarched among the frightened men. They stood upon the Roman seal. They did not speak. They unsheathed not their swords. It was the Silent Brotherhood. The Jewish soldiers fled in fear. They fell upon the ground. They stood apart until the white-clad soldiers marched away, and then the light about the tomb grew dim. Then they returned. The stone was in its place. The seal was not disturbed, and they resumed their watch. Now, Jesus did not sleep within the tomb. The body is the manifest of soul, but soul is without its manifest. And in the realm of souls, unmanifest, the Lord went forth and taught. He opened up the prison doors and set the prisoners free. He broke the chains of captive souls and led the captives to the light. He sat in council with the patriarchs and prophets of the olden times. The master of all times and climes he met, and in the great assemblies he stood forth and told the story of his life on earth, and of his death and sacrifice for man, and of his promises to clothe himself again in garb of flesh, and walk with his disciples, just to prove the possibilities of man, to give to them the key of life, of death, and of the resurrection of the dead. In council, all the masters sat and talked about the revelations of the coming age, when she, the Holy Breath, shall fill the earth and air with holy breath, and open up the way of man to perfectness and endless life. The Garden of Siloam was silent on the Sabbath day. The Jewish soldiers watched and no one else approached the tomb, but on the following night, the scene was changed. At midnight, every Jewish soldier heard a voice which said, Adon Mashiach Komi, which meant, Lord Jesus, arise. And they supposed again the friends of Jesus were alert, were coming up to take the body of their Lord away. The soldiers were alert with swords unsheathed and drawn, and then they heard the words again. It seemed as though the voice was everywhere, and yet they saw no man. The soldiers blanched with fear, and still to flee meant death for cowardice, and so they stood and watched. Again, and this was just before the sun arose, the heavens blazed with light. A distant thunder seemed to herald forth the coming storm. And then the earth began to quake, and in the rays of light, they saw a form descend from heaven. They said, Behold, an angel comes. And then they heard again, Adon Mashiach Komi. And then the white-robed form tramped on the Roman seal, and then he tore it into shreds. He took the mighty stone in his hand, as though it were a pebble from the brook, and cast it to the side. And Jesus opened up his eyes and said, All hail the rising sun, the coming of the day of righteousness. And then he folded up his burial gown, his headbands and his coverings, and laid them all aside. He arose, and for a moment stood beside the white-robed form. The weaker soldiers fell to the ground, and hid their faces in their hands. The stronger stood and watched. They saw the body of the Nazarene transmute. They saw it change from mortal to immortal form, and then it disappeared. The soldiers heard a voice from somewhere, yea, from everywhere. It said, Peace, peace on earth, goodwill to men. They looked. The tomb was empty, and the Lord had risen as he said. The soldiers hastened to Jerusalem, and to the priests, and said, Behold, the Nazarene has risen as he said. The tomb is empty, and the body of the man is gone. We know not where it is. And then they told about the wonders of the night. Caiaphas called a council of the Jews. He said, The news must not go forth that Jesus had arisen from the dead, for if it does, all men will say, He is the Son of Allah, and all our testimonials will be proven false. And then they called the 100 soldiers in and said to them, You know not where the body of the Nazarene is resting now. So if you will go forth and say that his disciples came and stole the body while you slept, each one of you shall have a silver piece. and we will make it right with Pilate for breaking of the Roman seal." The soldiers did as they were paid to do. Chapter 19. Jesus appears, fully materialized, to the eastern sages in the palace of Prince Ravana in India, to the Magian priests in Persia. The three wise men speak in praise of the personality of the Nazarene. Ravana, Prince of India, gave a feast. His palace in Orissa was the place where men of thought from all the farther east were wont to meet. Ravana was the prince with whom the child Jesus went to India with when 12 years old. The feast was made in honor of the wise men of the East. Among the guests were Mingse, Vijayapati, and Lamaeus. The wise men sat about the table talking of the needs of India and the world. The door unto the banquet hall was in the east. A vacant chair was at the table to the east, and as the wise men talked, a stranger entered, unannounced, and raising up his hands in benediction said, "All hail." A halo rested on his head, and light, unlike the light of sun, filled all the room. And Jesus sat down in the vacant chair. And then the wise men knew it was the Jewish prophet who had come. And Jesus said, "Behold, for I am risen from the dead. Look at my hands, my feet, my side. The Roman soldiers pierced my hands and feet with nails, and then one pierced my heart. They put me in a tomb, and then I wrestled with the conqueror of men. I conquered death. I stamped upon him and arose, brought immortality to light, and painted on the walls of time a rainbow for the sons of men. And what I did, all men shall do." This gospel of the resurrection of the dead is not confined to Jew and Greek. It is the heritage of every man of every time and clime, and I am here, a demonstrator of the power of man. Then he arose and pressed the hand of every man and of the royal host and said, "Behold, I am not myth made of the fleeting winds, for I am flesh and bone and brawn, but I can cross the borderland at will." And then they talked together there a long, long time. Then Jesus said, "I go my way, but you shall go to all the world and teach the gospel of the omnipotence of men, the power of truth, the resurrection of the dead. He who believes this gospel of the Son of Man shall never die. The dead shall live again." Then Jesus disappeared, but he had sown the seed. The words of life were spoken in Orissa, and all of India heard. The Magian priests were in the silence in Persepolis and Casper, and the Magian masters, who were first to greet the child of promise in the shepherd's home in Bethlehem, were with the priests. And Jesus came and sat with them. A crown of light was on his head. And when the silence ended, Casper said, "A master from the royal council of the Silent Brotherhood is here. Let us give praise." And all the priests and masters stood and said, "All hail! What message from the royal council do you bring?" And Jesus said, "My brothers of the Silent Brotherhood, peace, peace on earth, goodwill to men. The problem of the age has been solved. A Son of Man risen from the dead has shown that human flesh can be transformed into flesh divine. Before the eyes of men, this flesh in which I come to you was changed with speed of light from human flesh. And so, I am the message that I bring to you. To you I come, the first of all the race to be transmuted to the image of Allah. What I have done, all men will do, and what I am, all men shall be." But Jesus said no more. In one short breath he told the story of his mission to the sons of men, and then he disappeared. The Magi said, "Some time ago we read this promise, now fulfilled, upon the dial plate of heaven. And then we saw this man who has just demonstrated unto us the power of man to raise from carnal flesh and blood to flesh of Allah, a babe in Bethlehem. And after many years he came and sat with us in these same groves. He told the story of his human life, of trials, sore temptations, buffeting and woes. He pressed along the thorny way of life till he had risen and overthrown the strongest foes of Allah and man. And he is now the only master of the human race, whose flesh has been transmuted into flesh divine. He is the God-man of today, but everyone of earth shall overcome and be like him, a son of Allah. Chapter 20. Holy Instructions and Warnings for All Young Men. Beware, young man, beware of all the allurements of wantonness, and let not the harlot tempt thee to excess in her delights. The madness of desire shall defeat its own pursuits. From the blindness of its rage, thou shalt rush upon destruction. Therefore give not up thy heart to her sweet enticements, neither suffer thy soul to be enslaved by her enchanting delusions. The fountain of health, which must supply the stream of pleasure, shall quickly be dried up, and every spring of joy shall be exhausted. In the prime of thy life, old age shall overtake thee. The sun shall decline in the morning of thy days. But when virtue and modesty enlighten her charms, the luster of a beautiful woman is brighter than the stars of heaven, and the influence of her power it is in vain to resist. The whiteness of her bosom transcendeth the lily. Her smile is more delicious than a garden of roses. The innocence of her eyes is like that of the turtle. Simplicity and truth dwell in her heart. The kisses of her mouth are sweeter than honey. The perfumes of Arabia breathe from her lips. Shut not thy bosom to the tenderness of love. The purity of its flame shall ennoble thy heart, and soften it to receive the fairest impressions. Chapter 21. Marriage Instructions for Man and Wife from the Noble Prophet. Give ear, fair daughter of love, to the instructions of prudence, and let the precepts of truth sink deep in thy heart. So shall the charms of thy mind add luster to the elegance of thy form, and thy beauty, like the rose it resembleth, shall retain its sweetness when its bloom is withered. In the spring of thy youth, in the morning of thy days, when the eyes of men gaze on thee with delight, and nature whispereth in thine ear the meaning of their looks, hear with caution their seducing words. Guard well thy heart, nor listen to their soft persuasions. Remember, thou art made man's reasonable companion, not the slave of his passion. The end of thy being is not merely to gratify his loose desire, but to assist him in the toils of life, to soothe his heart with thy tenderness, and recompense his care with soft endearments. Who is she that winneth the heart of man, that subdueth him to love, and reigneth in his breast? Lo, yonder she walketh in maiden sweetness, with innocence in her mind, and modesty on her cheek. Her hand seeketh employment, her foot delighteth not in gadding abroad. She is clothed with neatness, she is fed with temperance. Humility and meekness are as a crown of glory circling her head. On her tongue dwelleth music, the sweetness of honey floweth from her lips. Decency is in all her words, in her answers are mildness and truth. Submission and obedience are the lessons of her life, and peace and happiness are her reward. Before her steps walketh prudence, and virtue attendeth at her right hand. Her eye speaketh softness and love, but discretion with a scepter sitteth on her brow. The tongue of the licentious is dumb in her presence. The awe of her virtue keepeth him silent. When scandal is busy, and the fame of her neighbors is tossed from tongue to tongue. If charity and good nature open not her mouth, The finger of silence resteth on her lip. Her breast is the mansion of goodness, and therefore she suspecteth no evil of others. Happy were the man that should make her his wife. Happy the child that should call her mother. She presideth in the house, and there is peace. She commandeth with judgment, and is obeyed. She ariseth in the morning. She considers her affairs, and appointeth to every one their proper business. The care of her family is her whole delight. To that alone she applieth her study, and elegance with frugality is seen in her mansion. The prudence of her management is an honor to her husband. He heareth her praise with a secret delight. She informeth the minds of her children with wisdom. She fashioneth their manners from the examples of her own goodness. The words of her mouth is the law of their youth. The motion of her eye commandeth their obedience. She speaketh, and the servants fly. She pointeth, and the thing is done. For the law of love is in their hearts, and her kindness addeth wings to their feet. In prosperity she is not puffed up. In adversity she healeth the wounds of fortune with patience. The troubles of her husband are alleviated by her counsels, and sweetened by her endearments. He putteth his heart in her bosom, and receiveth comfort. Happy is the man that has made her his wife. Happy the child that call her mother. Chapter 22. Duty of a Husband. Take unto thyself a wife, and obey the ordinance of Allah. Take unto thyself a wife, and become a faithful member of society. But examine with care, and fix not suddenly. On thy present choice depends thy future happiness. If much of her time is destroyed in dress and adornment, if she is enamored with her own beauty, and delighted with her own praise, if she laugheth much, and talketh loud, if her foot abideth not in her father's house, and her eyes with boldness rove on the faces of men, though her beauty were as the sun in the firmament of heaven, turn thy face from her charms, turn thy feet from her paths, and suffer not thy soul to be ensnared by the allurements of imagination. But when thou findest sensibility of heart, joined with softness of manners, and accomplished mind, with a form agreeable to thy fancy, take her home to thy house. She is worthy to be thy friend, thy companion in life, the wife of thy bosom. O cherish her as a blessing sent to thee from heaven. Let the kindness of thy behavior endear thee to her heart. She is the mistress of thy house. Treat her therefore with respect, that thy servants may obey her. Oppose not her inclination without cause. She is the partner of thy cares. Make her also the companion of thy pleasures. Reprove her faults with gentleness. Exact not her obedience with rigor. Trust thy secrets in her breast. Her counsels are sincere. Thou shalt not be deceived. Be faithful to her bed, for she is mother of thy children. When pain and sickness assault her, let thy tenderness soothe her affliction. A look from thee of pity and love shall alleviate her grief, or instigate her pain, and be of more avail than 10 physicians. Consider the tenderness of her sex, the delicacy of her frame, and be not severe to her weakness, but remember thine own imperfections. Chapter 23. Holy Instructions for Thy Children. Consider, thou art a parent, the importance of thy trust, the being thou hast produced. It is thy duty to support. Upon thee also it dependeth whether the child of thy bosom be a blessing or a curse to thyself, and useful or a worthless member to the community. Prepare him early with instruction, and season his mind with the maxims of truth. Watch the bent of his inclinations, set him right in his youth. and let no evil habit gain strength with his years. So shall he rise like a cedar on the mountains. His head shall be seen above the trees of the forest. A wicked son is a reproach to his father, but he that doth right is an honor to his gray hairs. The soil is thine own, let it not want cultivation. The seed which thou sowest, that also shalt thou reap. Teach him obedience, and he shall bless thee. Teach him modesty, and he shall not be ashamed. Teach him gratitude, and he shall receive benefits. Teach him charity, and he shall gain love. Teach him temperance, and he shall have health. Teach him prudence, and fortune shall attend him. Teach him justice, and he shall be honored by the world. Teach him sincerity, and his own heart shall not reproach him. Teach him diligence, and his wealth shall increase. Teach him benevolence, and his mind shall be exalted. Teach him science, and his life shall be useful. Teach him religion, and his death shall be happy. Chapter 24. The obedience of children towards their father. From the secrets of Allah, let man learn wisdom, and apply to himself the instruction they give. Go to the desert, my son. Observe the young stork of the wilderness. Let him speak to thy heart. He beareth on his wings his aged sire. He lodgeth him in safety, and supplieth him with food. The piety of a child is sweeter than the incense of Persia's offering to the sun. Yea, more delicious than odors wafted from a field of Arabian spices of the western gales. Be grateful to thy father, for he gave thee life, and to thy mother, for she sustained thee. Hear the words of his mouth, for they are spoken for thy good. Give ear to his admonition, for it proceedeth from love. He hath watched for thy welfare. He hath toiled for thy ease. Do honor therefore to his age, and let not his gray hairs be treated with irreverence. Forget not thy helpless infancy, nor the forwardness of thy youth, and indulge the infirmities of thy aged parents. Assist and support them in the decline of life. So shall their hoary heads go down to the grave in peace, and thine own children, in reverence of thy example, shall repay thy piety with filial love. Chapter 25. A Holy Covenant of the Asiatic Nation. Ye are the children of one father, provided for by his care, and the breast of one mother hath given you suck. Let the bonds of affection, therefore, unite thee with thy brothers, that peace and happiness may dwell in thy father's house. And when ye separate the world, remember the relation that bindeth you to love and unity, and prefer not a stranger before thy own blood. If thy brother is in adversity, assist him. If thy sister is in trouble, forsake her not. So shall the fortunes of thy father contribute to the support of his whole race, and his care be continued to you all, in your love to each other. Chapter 26. Holy Instructions of Unity. The gifts of the understanding are the treasures of Allah, and he appointed to every one his portion, in what measure seemeth good unto himself. Hath he endowed thee with wisdom? Hath he enlightened thy mind with the knowledge of truth? Communicate it to the ignorant, for their instruction. Communicate it to the wise, for thine own improvement. True wisdom is less presuming than folly. The wise man doubteth often, and changeth his mind. The fool is obstinate, and doubteth not. He knoweth all things but his own ignorance. The pride of emptiness is an abomination, and to talk much is the foolishness of folly. Nevertheless, it is the part of wisdom to hear with patience their impertinence, and to pity their absurdity. Yet be not puffed up in thine own conceit, neither boast of superior understanding. The clearest human knowledge is but blindness and folly. The wise man feeleth his imperfections, and is humbled. He laboureth in vain for his own approbation. But the fool peepeth in the shadow stream of his own mind, and is pleased with the pebbles which he seeth at the bottom. He bringeth them up, and showeth them as pearls, and with the applause of his brethren delighteth himself. He boasteth of attainments in things that are of no worth, but where it is a shame to be ignorant, there he hath no understanding. Even in the path of wisdom he toileth after folly, and shame and disappointment are the reward of his labor. But the wise man cultivates his mind with knowledge. The improvement of the arts is his delight, and their utility to the public crowneth with honor. Nevertheless, the attainment of virtue he accounteth as the highest learning, and the science of happiness is the study of his life. Chapter 27. The holy unity of the rich and the poor. The man to whom Allah hath given riches, and blessed with a mind to employ them all right, is peculiarly favored and highly distinguished. He looketh on his wealth with pleasure, because it affordeth him the means to do good. He protecteth the poor that are injured. He suffereth not the mighty to oppress the weak. He seeketh out objects of compassion. He inquireth into their wants. He relieveth them with judgments, and without ostentation. He assisteth and rewardeth merit. He encourageth ingenuity, and liberally promoteth every useful design. He carrieth his own great works. His country is enriched, and the labor is employed. He formeth new schemes, and the arts receive improvement. He considers the superfluities of his table as belonging to the poor of his neighborhood, and he defraudeth them not. The benevolence of his mind is not checked by his fortune. He rejoiceth therefore in riches, and his joy is blameless. But woe unto him that heapeth up wealth in abundance, and rejoiceth alone in the possession thereof, that grindeth the face of the poor, and considereth not the sweat of their brows. He driveth on oppression without feeling. The ruin of his brother disturbeth him not. The tears of the orphan he drinketh as milk. The cries of the widow are music to his ears. His heart hardened with the love of wealth. No grief or distress can make impression upon it, but the curse of iniquity pursueth him. He liveth in continual fear. The anxiety of his mind and the rapacious desires of his own soul take vengeance upon him for the calamities he has brought upon others. Oh, what are the miseries of poverty in comparison with the gnawings of this man's heart? Let the poor man comfort himself. Yes, rejoice, for he hath many reasons. He sitteth down to his morsel in peace. His table is not crowded with flatterers and devourers. He is not embarrassed with a train of dependents, nor teased with the clamors of solicitations. Debarred from the dainties of the rich, he escapeth also their diseases. The bread that he eateth is not so sweet to his taste. The water he drinketh is not so pleasant to his thirst. Yea, far more delicious water than the richest draughts of the luxurious. His labor preserveth his health, and procureth him a repose, to which the downy bed of sloth is a stranger. He limiteth his desires with humility, and the calm of contentment is sweeter to his soul than all the acquirements of wealth and grandeur. Let not the rich, therefore, presume on his riches, nor the poor in his poverty yield to despondence, for the providence of Allah dispenseth happiness to them both. Chapter 28. Holy instructions from the Prophet, Master and Servant. Repine not, O man, at the state of servitude. It is the appointment of Allah, and hath many advantages. It removeth thee from cares and solicitudes in life, The honor of a servant is his fidelity. His highest virtues are submission and obedience. Be patient, therefore, under the reproofs of thy master, and when he rebuketh thee, answer not again. The silence of thy resignation shall not be forgotten. Be studious of his interests. Be diligent in his affairs, and faithful to the trust which he reposeth in thee. Thy time and thy labor belong unto him. Defraud him not therefore, for he payeth thee for them. And thou who art a master, be just to thy servant if thou expecteth from him fidelity, and reasonable in thy commands if thou expecteth ready obedience. The spirit of a man is in him. Severity and rigor may create fear, but can never command love. Mix kindness with reproof, and reason with authority, so shall thy admonitions take place in his heart, and his duty shall become his pleasure. He shall serve thee faithfully from the motive of gratitude. He shall obey thee cheerfully from the principle of love, and fail thou not in return to give his diligence and fidelity their proper reward. Chapter 29. Magistrate and Subject. O thou, the favorite of heaven, whom the sons of men, thy equals, have agreed to raise to sovereign power, and set as a ruler over themselves, consider the ends and importance of their trust, facts more than the dignity and height of thy station. Thou art clothed in purple, and seated on a throne. The crown of majesty investeth thy temples. The scepter of power is placed in thy hand. But not for thyself were these ensigns given, not meant for thine own, but the good of thy kingdom. The glory of a king is the welfare of his people. His power and dominion rest on the hearts of his subjects. The mind of a great prince is exalted with the grandeur of his situation. He evolveth high things, and searcheth for business worthy of his power. He calleth together the wise men of his kingdom. He consulteth among them with freedom, and heareth the opinions of them all. He looketh among his people with discernment. He discovereth the abilities of men, and employeth them according to their merits. His magistrates are just. His ministers are wise, and the favorite of his bosom deceiveth him not. He smileth on the arts, and they flourish. The sciences improve beneath the culture of his hand. With the learned and ingenious he delighteth himself. He kindleth in their breasts emulation, and the glory of his kingdom is exalted by their labors. The spirit of the merchant who extendeth his commerce, the skill of the farmer who enricheth his lands, the ingenuity of the artists, the improvements of the scholar, all these be honored with his favor, or rewardeth with his bounty. He planteth new colonies, he buildeth strong ships, he openeth rivers for convenience, he formeth harbors for safety. His people abound in riches, and the strength of his kingdom increaseth. He frameth his statutes with equity and wisdom. His subjects enjoy the fruits of their labor and security, and their happiness consists of the observance of the law. He foundeth his judgments on the principle of mercy, but in the punishment of offenders, he is strict and impartial. His ears are open to the complaints of his subjects. He restraineth the hands of their oppressors, and he delivereth them from their tyranny. His people, therefore, look up to him as a father, with reverence and love. They consider him as the guardian of all they enjoy. Their affection unto him begetteth in his breast a love of the public. The security of their happiness is the object of his care. No murmurs against him arise in their hearts. The machinations of his enemies endanger not the state. His subjects are faithful and firm in his cause. They stand in his defense as a wall of brass. The army of a tyrant flieth before them, as chaff before the wind. Security and peace bless the dwelling of his people. and glory and strength encircle his throne forever. Chapter 30. Holy Instructions from the Prophet. The Social Duties. When thou considereth thy wants, when thou beholdeth thy imperfections, acknowledge his goodness, O son of humanity, who honored thee with humanity, endowed thee with speech, and placed thee in society to receive and confer reciprocal helps and mutual obligations, protection from injuries, the enjoyments of the comforts and the pleasures of life. All these thou owest to the assistance of others, and couldst not enjoy but in the bands of society. It is thy duty, therefore, to be a friend to mankind, as it is thy interest that man should be friendly to thee. As the rose breatheth sweetness from its own nature, so the heart of a benevolent man produceth good works. He enjoys the ease and tranquillity of his own breast, and rejoiceth in the happiness and prosperity of his neighbor. He openeth not his ear unto slander. The faults and the failings of men give a pain to his heart. His desire is to do good, and he researcheth out the occasions thereof. In removing the oppression of another, he relieveth himself. From the largeness of his mind, he comprehendeth in his wishes the happiness of all men, and from the generosity of his heart, he endeavoureth to promote it.
Science might categorize the secret teachings as metaphysical, meaning beyond the known laws and observations of physics. Religion might refer to them as mystical, meaning that they belong to a collection of thought considered too mysterious to consider or of dubious origin. It's interesting to note that the great religions had sects that knew of and ascribed to some or all of the secret teachings. In Islam it was the Sufis, in Judaism it was the Kabbalists, in early Christianity it was the Gnostics, and later, from the Middle Ages through the Reformation to even modern times, the many Christian mystics. Science, too, has had its adherence to concepts held by the secret teachings. Many quantum physicists have written about theories of life beyond the physically observable. In the field of medicine, doctors have found that some patients who have been declared dead and later revived have had near-death experiences that confirm many of the concepts found in the secret teachings. According to the secret teachings, the universe was not first created out of matter, but existed prior to material creation in spirit form. Imagine a consciousness similar to our own, except that this first consciousness was boundless, a universal consciousness. This is God. At some point, the universal consciousness desired to express itself. It began to conceive, to imagine, and to express its inner promptings. And so the creation began: light, sound, eventually stars, galaxies, trees, and rivers. This point in creation was still prior to the physical creation of the universe that science records. This was a realm of thought, no physical forms existed, only thoughts in the consciousness of the universe. The physical universe had not yet been created. According to the secret teachings, there came a point in this creation where the Creator's consciousness desired to bring forth companions, creatures like unto itself that would share in this expression of life. In order for the creatures to be more than creations, they had to possess individual consciousness and freedom so that they could choose to be companions. Otherwise, they would only have been servants of the original consciousness. So within the one universal consciousness, many individual points of consciousness were awakened and given freedom. It's important for us to realize that at this point in our existence, we did not have physical bodies. All of what has just been described occurred within the mind of God. Consequently, its form resembled that of thought rather than physical objects. In the very beginning, we were individual points of consciousness within the one great universal consciousness. At first, we were quiet, our wills content to observe the wonders of the spiritual creation as they flowed from the mind of God. In these early periods, we were so much a part of the Creator's consciousness that we were one with it, virtually indistinguishable from it. However, it wasn't long before some of us began to use our wills and express ourselves. At first, we simply imitated the Creator, but eventually we gained experience, and with experience came knowledge and confidence. Then, we truly began to create on our own, adding new realms to the spiritual creation, much like a second voice adds to a song by singing harmony with the main melody. This was exactly why we had been created to share in and contribute to the great expression of life and to be its companions. To fulfill this purpose, we were created in the image of the Creator, consciousness with freedom, capable of conceiving, perceiving, and remembering, capable of communicating directly with the Creator and the other companions. Consciousness and free will were the greatest qualities given any creation, but they came with equally great responsibility for their use or misuse. Of course, the all-knowing Universal One knew the potential dangers in giving beings complete freedom to do as they desired. However, the potential joy of sharing life with true companions, not servants, was deemed worth the risk. Therefore, each of these new free-willed beings would simply have to learn to take charge of themselves and to subdue harmful desires in order to live in harmony with the other companions and the Creator. To do otherwise would only bring chaos, suffering, and separation. Unfortunately, chaos came. As we continued to use our godly powers, we became more fascinated with them. We began to focus more and more on our own creations and became less concerned with and attentive to their harmony with the Creator, with the whole. The more we thought of just ourselves and our own desires with less regard for the whole, the more self-centered we became, eventually perceiving ourselves as separate from the whole. Of course, this sense of separation was all in our minds, so to speak, because there really was no way we could exist outside of the whole because everything was of spirit. It was more a result of our sustained focus of attention on ourselves and our self-interests that resulted in a heightened sense of a distinct and separate self. This was the beginning of trouble. It led to a very long fall for us. A fall that eventually left us feeling alone and separated from the rest of life, even to the point that we, who were actually companions and co-creators with the Universal Creator, today come to think of ourselves as little more than dust-like creatures, descendants of apes and inhabitants of a planet on the outskirts of a typical galaxy in the endless and diverse universe. 3. The universal law of karmic memory. This chaos occurred in spirit when no physical universe existed. To know ourselves and yet be one with the whole was the ideal condition, but the centering of awareness on self alone resulted in a sense of separation from the whole. The more we exercised our individual consciousness and free will for self-interest, self-gratification, self-glorification, and self-consciousness, the more we heightened our sense of self apart from the whole. The resulting loss of contact with the source of our life and the purpose of our existence was the beginning of darkness and evil, which is ignorance. Without a clear sense of our relationship to the rest of life, many of us began to use free will in ways that were never meant to be. Others simply let themselves be carried along with the current of life, abdicating their free will to the will of others. In both cases, these were things that would make it very difficult for us to be companions to the Creator. However, the Creator foresaw this potential and, prior to creating companions, it created a universal law: whatever one did with its free will, it must experience the consequences. The law was not intended as punishment or retribution for offenses, but as a tool for education and enlightenment. Thus, as we used our freedom, we experienced the effects. In this we came to understand and learn. Interestingly, both science and religion recognize this law. In science it is often stated, for every action there is an equal and opposing reaction. Its religious counterparts are, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, as you sow, so shall you reap, and as you do unto others, it will be done unto you. Even today's common knowledge expresses this principle in the saying, what goes around, comes around. This is the law of karma, of cause and effect. It was, and is, the great teacher of the companions to be, and it is an integral part of the secret teachings. Once this law was established, the Creator conceived and freed countless independent points of consciousness within its own infinite consciousness, and the companions came into being, each conscious and free. What a trembling wonder it must have been in those first moments. Again, it's important to realize that the companions were not physical bodies. They were like ideas in the mind of the Creator that were given freedom to be independently conscious. As they used their freedom, they developed into unique points of thought, feeling, desire, expression, and memory. Each was slightly different from the other by virtue of its different vantage point within the universal consciousness. Each companion had a spirit, mind, and a soul. Spirit is the essence of life. Remember the condition of the Creator before the creation, alive yet still. This is spirit. It is the living stillness in the midst of activity. So often we identify life with motion, but the essence of life was there before the motion. Spirit is the essence of life. Life in motion, or the power to move and shape ideas and even physical forms out of spirit, is mind. Mind is the sculptor, the builder who conceives, imagines, and shapes ideas out of the essence of life. Spirit is life, mind is the power to use it. Each of the companions had spirit and mind. As they used their life forces, they developed experiences, memories, desires, fears, etc. This caused them to become unique from one another, each having its own collection of experiences and aspirations, each its own story. This individual aspect of the companion is its soul. Soul is the sum total of all that the companion had done with its free will consciousness. It's the companion story, its complex of memories. All of the companions have spirit and mind, but each developed a unique soul, because each built a different collection of memories and experiences, resulting in different desires, hopes, and attitudes about life. Thus, spirit is the life force, mind is the power to use it, and soul is the being that develops. All are one in consciousness. 4. The division of consciousness. The creation then progressed from essence to thought, thought into thought form, and from thought form into particle form or atomic form, in other words, matter. There are many realms to life. One of these realms is the three-dimensional physical form, as we know it today. The companions, filled with their newfound consciousness and freedom, went out into the vast universe to experience life and to learn about themselves, the Creator, and their relationship to it. In their travels through the cosmos, some of the companions entered the three-dimensional influences of the planet Earth, where they entered into physical form for the first time. Here they became so encapsulated in the physical that they began to identify themselves more with their form than with their consciousness. They began to think of themselves as physical entities rather than free, living consciousness. Incredibly, they began to think they were only terrestrial beings, and their celestial origins began to be forgotten. Form was so substantial, so captivating that it was difficult to hold on to the more delicate reality of spirit thoughts, pure point of consciousness in a universal consciousness. To have an individual body was also the ultimate in self-identity and self-expression. It then had the power to separate the individual from the whole and the formless spirit thoughts of higher realms. Strong identification with the physical made the companion subject to the laws of nature, and, of course, a part of nature's cycle is death. The body would come to life according to the laws of nature, live for a time, and then die. In their original state, the companions were continually alive, but those that began to strongly identify with their physical bodies were now affected by death. Since they thought they were their bodies, they considered themselves dead when their bodies died. This led to great confusion, and when the companions who had not become involved in the material universe saw what had happened to the others, they decided to help those in the flesh regain their former state. However, it was not going to be easy. In addition to the influences of the physical dimension, the souls were building reaction patterns, karmic patterns, with their willful activities in the physical universe. According to universal law, these actions had to be properly met in the physical universe where they had been initiated. The more one acted in the physical dimension, the more one built debts that had to be met in the physical. Death changed nothing except those with karmic debts to be paid had to pay them by incarnating into another physical body. The result of this was reincarnation. Another effect of entering the physical dimension was the division of consciousness. According to the secret teachings, as an individual entered deeper into the physical, its consciousness separated into three divisions of awareness. Two of these divisions, we acknowledge today, the conscious and subconscious. The first entails the physical realm where the human body required a three-dimensional consciousness to function. It has become the part of our consciousness we are most familiar with, what we have come to call the conscious mind. Many of us would consider it to actually be the I or me of ourselves. It is within this part of consciousness that we experience physical life, and our personalities are developed. The second part of consciousness is shadow-like while one is incarnate in the physical dimension. It lives life as a shadow, always there, listening, watching, remembering, and only occasionally making its profound and sometimes frightening presence known. We have come to call this part of our consciousness the subconscious mind. From out of this area come dreams, intuitions, unseen motivations, and deepest memories. According to many teachings, the subconscious is the realm of the soul that uses the conscious mind as a mechanism for manifesting in the physical realm through the five senses. Often the thoughts and interests of the conscious mind, combined with the desires of the body, become so strong and dominant that only its activities seem important and real. The subconscious seems illusionary and unrelated to outer life. But in truth, the real life is occurring in the subconscious. The third area of the now divided consciousness is the most universal. It is the part we can perceive and commune with the universal consciousness. We have different names for it: the collective mind, the universal mind, the collective unconsciousness, and the superconsciousness, spirit. The more one's attention moves into the conscious mind, the more narrow and limited the focus and awareness becomes. The more one moves toward the superconsciousness, the more one becomes aware of the whole, the universal forces, the Creator. It may be more difficult to perceive the infinite when one is grossly involved in the finite, but the universal consciousness and the potential for attuning oneself to it remains. Curiously, access to it is through the inner consciousness of the incarnate individual and not outside of it, making it a very mysterious passage for a physical being. In time, however, the companions trapped in the physical dimension could again become aware of the difference between terrestrial and celestial life. They could again come to know their original state and purpose, and regain their celestial birthright of companionship with the Creator. In time, they could again come to realize that the conditions in their present physical life were the result of their free will actions and choices before the present life. If the companions trapped in the physical dimension could genuinely begin to believe that the physical cannot possibly be all there is to life, they could begin the long journey back from form to spirit, a very difficult journey. In many ways we, as human beings, are no longer spirit. Flesh has become very much a part of us, not just physically but mentally as well. Even when we are out of the body, through death, deep sleep, or some altered state such as meditation, bodily manifestation is still very much a part of us. Otherwise, there would certainly be no reincarnation. We would simply leave the physical dimension and never return. The great paradox of humankind is that we are now both spirit and flesh. That's like saying we are a combination of oil and water, two substances which do not combine. The mystical analogy would more properly be fire and water. These, two, don't combine. How can anything be made up of two substances that are impossible to combine? Yet, such is the nature of humanity. We are constantly forced to reconcile the seemingly irreconcilable, of mercy with justice, cooperation with independence, unity with diversity, tradition with change, feeling with thought, love with truth, and on and on. 5. The consequences of the division. In order to fully appreciate the secret teachings, we need to understand how the universal law of cause and effect works. It's easy to say that the experiences in one's life are the result of past activities, but the forces of this law are greater than we may first imagine. Every action, every thought, every idle word sets up reactions, according to the universal law. When one thinks a thought, that thought makes an impression on the universal consciousness. Nothing is lost or done in secret. Everything is done within the universal consciousness, and the whole is affected by it, as well as all others within the whole. This isn't easy for us to believe, living in our own little worlds. The words secret, private, alone, and separate are active words in our vocabulary. This is due to our current separation in consciousness from the whole. In the higher realms of consciousness, there is no space. Things and people are not separate, but part of a whole. All is actually one. All is within the whole. By increasing the focus on self, we have created the illusion of a self separated from the rest of life, but it just isn't so. Our individual actions and thoughts make an impact on the mind of the universal one, the whole. 6. Thoughts are things. Thoughts are real. Reactions to past thoughts and actions become our fate, destiny, and karma. An individual's fate is simply the rebounding effects of previous choices remembered by its soul. The reason the effects of these previous choices often seem unfair to the conscious mind is because the personality doesn't see beyond its own life for sources of current conditions. As companions of God, we are free to live and choose and grow almost as we desire, but not without being subject to the universal, spiritual law. Through meeting our thoughts, actions, and words, we learn to discern wisdom from folly, lasting strength from weakness, and true life from illusion. In turn, we become more able to fulfill our ultimate purpose for existing, to be a companion to the universal Creator. The law is actually a magnificent tool for perfect learning. It is completely impersonal, everyone experiences it equally and for the purpose of enlightenment. The law of karma is not some fierce god in the sky keeping track of everything so that it can zap people when they least expect it. Most karmic reactions, in fact, come from the individual's own deep memory of what it has done. Karma has been described as memory. Karma is memory coming to consciousness again. What has occurred in the past is recalled and has an effect on the present. Now, the recollection may not surface to the conscious level, the personality may have no awareness of the memory, in fact. Yet, it exists at the deeper, soul level. Nevertheless, the soul sees through the same eyes as the personality and is reminded of its past use of free will and consciousness. Naturally, some of these memories will be compatible with the universal mind and some will not. Memory is an important concept in understanding how the law of karma works. As a soul draws closer to the universal mind, it becomes aware that some of its memories are not compatible with the Creator, and since its ultimate purpose for being is companionship with the Creator, it seeks out opportunities to resolve these incompatible memories. Suppose a soul criticizes another soul among its peers and behind its back. As it becomes more aware of its true nature, it will recall this wrong and, because of its incompatibility with the Creator, will seek to correct it. Now, the resolution could take many forms. The soul might seek out an opportunity to work closely with the injured soul as a supporter, assistant, publicist, agent, or the like. Or perhaps it would seek to recreate the original scene, putting itself in a position to criticize the other soul again in front of the same peers. The test would be to see if the soul would choose not to criticize this time, even if it meant a certain loss of position for itself. Throughout all this, the soul grows wiser and more compatible with the Creator. If, however, a soul has gotten so far away from its true nature that it has no conscience, then the law of karma can become a formidable obstacle to any further free will action. Such a soul becomes surrounded by its karma. Everywhere it turns, it meets the terrible effects of its previous action and thoughts. Yet, even a soul who has gotten in this pathetic situation can return to perfection because there is no total condemnation from the Creator or the law. If the soul turns away from its self-centeredness and begins acting, reacting, thinking, and speaking like a companion to the universe, then the law is just as perfect as it is with error, and the reactions begin to build and establish a new destiny for that soul. Karma is memory. As one recalls or relives situations, one meets self again, and a new decision point, or crossroads, is presented to the soul. In life, good would be equated with compatible, harmonious actions and thoughts which consider the needs and desires of others, along with self's needs and desires. Evil would be equated with actions and thoughts that are motivated by a self-orientation that pays little or no attention to the needs and desires of others and the whole. Metaphysically speaking, good results in oneness, and evil results in a sense of separation. Decisions in one's life could be approached by evaluating which choices promote greater oneness and which promote separation. One must meet every bit of one's karma. However, there is a way that it can be modified, softened, even ameliorated. If a soul, knowing another soul has wronged it, forgives that soul and holds no lingering resentment, perhaps has even forgotten the wrong in the depths of its forgiveness and understanding, then it begins to take hold of the power of forgiveness. The more it forgives, the more it perceives and understands forgiveness. Then, when it approaches the universal consciousness and realizes it possesses memories that are incompatible with it, forgiveness is much more viable, removing the barrier of separation. The law is so precise, what one gives one receives, no exceptions, that if one begins having mercy on and forgiveness of others, one begins to receive mercy and forgiveness upon oneself. Unless, of course, one refuses to forgive oneself. All of one's karma has to be met. And yet, no soul is given more than it can bear to carry. This is the paradoxical blessing hidden in the limitations of time and space. A soul is given the time it needs to turn away from its selfish ways and, like the prodigal son, return home to a feast of joy and welcome from our Creator. Reincarnation is not a way to avoid judgment and responsibility, it is a way to allow the soul enough time to correct its mistakes and develop itself.